Okay, Smokey, roll 'em.
In the last few years of his life, Walt Disney had grown obsessed with what legacy he would leave behind after he was gone. In his stately elder years, he had grown disinterested in both the animation and theme park business that he had pioneered. He had instead found a new passion in constructing a revolutionary concept of urban planning, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, or Epcot for short. Its general unfeasibility, as well as Walt's own failing health, ensured that his city of tomorrow would never make it past the blueprint pitch. When Walt passed away in 1966, people chose to remember him as an imaginative storyteller rather than the innovative futurist he wanted to be. The last year of Walt's life was spent mostly in boardroom meetings and hospital beds. During one such hospital stay, 6 weeks before his passing, Walt Disney got a visitor who wasn't family or a business partner. It was animator Chuck Jones. After leaving Disney following his very brief tenure during the Warner shutdown in the early 50s, Jones and Disney had kept a small correspondence with each other through letters. Jones had honestly been surprised that Disney took the time to reply to each one of those letters, and, during that visit, asked Walt why a busy man like him took the time to respond to them all. Walt replied, "It wasn't difficult. You are the only animator who ever wrote to me." Those words really struck Jones. Despite their differences in station, creative process, and especially politics, Jones had immense respect for Walt Disney and believed that if it wasn't for him, he and many other animators would not be where they were at that moment. To Chuck, Walt's legacy was animation. Unlike Walt, Chuck was not thinking about legacy at that time. While he was no longer a young man and now helping raise a family, he was still hard at work in the animation industry. His eyes were on the present, not the past. Not on the studio where he got his start as an animator and a director. Not on the studio that rewarded decades of hard work by firing him for breach of contract. Not on the studio that was, at the time, drowning in low-budget mediocrity and would be shuttered permanently in 3 years' time. He did not know it at the time, but that studio would shape a large part of his legacy, along with the legacy of his past colleagues. Friz Freeling's, Bob Clampett's, Tex Avery's, Frank Tashlins, Robert McKimson's, and many other directors, animators, voice actors, and composers. All their legacies are connected to a series of shorts that lasted 40 years. But the legacies of the Looney Tunes shorts, its characters, and its creators were not all built overnight. Like with all legacies, it took years to construct into the established history that we know it today. The Looney Tunes story did not end in 1969 when the shorts did. It instead entered a new chapter, one that began at the end, one that spanned decades like the one that came before it, and one that's going to be told right now.
Oh, well, fiddlesticks. Oh, pussycat. Beep, beep, what a way to run a railroad. Gosh, I'm so unimportant.
He's really a wonderful guy in person, and I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting him. Ladies and gentlemen, need I say more? Let's welcome Mr. Daffy Duck. Boy, they really love you, Daffy.
Yes, they certainly do, don't they?
The 1970s begins with a death. On February 22nd, 1970, after a period of long illness, former Warner Brothers producer Eddie Seltzer passed away at age 77. In his last will and testament, he had 2 of the Oscars he had won for producing Looney Tunes shorts given over to 2 of the people who had actually done the work on them. His Oscar for Birds Anonymous going to voice actor Mel Blanc, and his Oscar for Tweety Pie going to director Friz Freeling. The deaths would not stop there, as more of Warner Brothers cartoons' big movers and shakers would end up dying within a year of each other. Warren Foster, the story man who had helped Bob Clampett conceive some of his most memorable shorts, died on December 13, 1971, at age 67. Ted Pierce, screenwriter and voice actor for Looney Tunes from the mid-30s to the 60s, died on February 19, 1972, at age 65. Frank Tashlin, the former comics artist turned shorts director, the man who made the Looney Tunes feel more like cinematic comedies, the man who used the knowledge he had gained from Termite Terrace to transition into a lucrative career as a comedy film director, died on May 5, 1972, of coronary thrombosis at age 59. And Carl W. Stalling, the composer responsible for giving the Looney Tunes shorts their trademark orchestral sound, the sound that was just as memorable as its characters, died on November 29, 1972, 19 days after his 81st birthday. On the living side, the former Warner alumnus kept on trucking in their own ways. Friz Freleng oversaw the growth of his own studio that he had formed with producer David DePatie Freleng, creating shorts starring the Pink Panther and other, more forgotten characters for Studio United artists. Quality aside, they were a great way for Freleng to keep giving work to his former Termite Terrace colleagues like Robert McKimson and Art Davis. Tex Avery had been struggling with depression following his son's death by heroin overdose and the subsequent breakup of his marriage. Most of his income at this time was made through animation for the advertising company Cascade Studios, which included creating the famous and controversial mascot Frito Bandito. Bob Clampett was enjoying retirement by going around the college circuit and telling students about the behind-the-scenes work in the early days of cartooning. The founders of Looney Tunes, Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising, had found themselves on different paths in their respective retirements. Hugh Harman had been notoriously bad with money for most of his life and was now residing in an apartment complex on Skid Row. He often found himself having to borrow money just to make rent on time. Many younger animators and former colleagues, including Walt Disney's brother Roy, were happy to write him checks just so he could keep a roof over his head. Rudy Ising, on the other hand, was much better with his money in life and was now retired in Beverly Hills. Following the closure of MGM's animation department in the late 60s, Chuck Jones decided to form his own animation studio, Chuck Jones Enterprises. Formed mostly out of the animation team he had for his final MGM production, the 1970 film The Phantom Tollbooth, the studio's area of focus was on educational children's shows and TV specials based off of popular children's books. Jones was also experimenting with a new style of character design that he had evolved from his work on the Grinch special, drawing his characters with leaner bodies, more realistic movements, and larger, cuter eyes. And then there were the Looney Tunes themselves. After the shuttering of the Warner Brothers Shorts department amidst the sea of poor animation, ill-received new characters, and pitches that thankfully went nowhere, the Looney Tunes' primary place of residence was now on the TV in your living room, either in reruns of their shorts or as animated commercial pitchmen.
The only place to catch a Roadrunner is at your Plymouth dealers.
To their new owners, Kinney National Corporation, Bugs and Pals were just one of several intellectual properties they now had under their umbrella. One that they understood the value of in keeping on TV, but were still quite careless with. Best shown in 1971, where they had failed to renew the copyright on 121 Looney Tunes and Merrie Melody shorts produced between 1930 to 1943, causing them to enter the public domain. That carelessness could also be due to Kinney National having bigger issues to worry about. Steve Ross and his growing conglomerate were buying as many entertainment and print companies as they could on their dime, but such an ascent had accumulated some baggage along the way. Some very illegal baggage. In 1971, the story broke that Kinney National had been price-fixing their parking operations. There were also allegations that the reason Kinney's parking division was successful, but not profitable, was because money was being skimmed off the top and put into a slush fund. And some digging from Forbes magazine that year had connected the founding of Kinney Parking Company to Abner Longy Zwillman, a notorious member of the New Jersey Mafia. Lucky for Ross, he knew how to make this scandal disappear. On June 10, 1971, Kinney spun off their parking and cleaning divisions into a separate business called National Kinney Corporation. They also sold off their funeral home business, Riverside Memorial Chapel, to Service Corporation International. With their non-entertainment assets spun off, the company could now focus entirely on entertainment, rechristening themselves as Warner Communications Inc. on February 10, 1972. It would have happened sooner or later, scandal or no. Under Ross's command, he was helping the studio bounce back by investing in and distributing riskier movies the other studios weren't touching. Movies like Woodstock, Billy Jack, and A Clockwork Orange were surprise box office successes and made the studio feel more ahead of the game than behind. This attitude made Warner Brothers one of the more accommodating studios to the new generation of filmmakers, the baby boomer writers and directors of the countercultural generation who came of age watching the film and TV of the golden age of Hollywood. They sought to destroy the old ways of the glitzy establishment while rebuilding the filmic art form in their own image, all while using lessons they took away from watching foreign cinema and independent features. But even then, they still couldn't resist the siren call of nostalgia and began to draw inspiration from the film and TV of their childhood, one of these being the Looney Tunes shorts.
What's up, Doc?
In 1972, Peter Bogdanovich's What's Up, Doc? Paid loving homage not just to the screwball comedies of the 1930s and 40s, but also to the Looney Tunes shorts of that era, having starred Barbra Streisand at like a Bugs Bunny type right down to the accents, coolly causing chaos with an unflappable grin on her face.
Why, Miss Burns, what are you doing in Mr. Ballas's bedroom? Don't you know the meaning of propriety?
In 1974, Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles took the Looney Tunes inspiration a notch further.
Well, that's the end of this suit.
Twisting the typical Western into a cartoonish parody of itself, all while wearing its influences on its sleeves.
Mungo like candy.
That's not even counting the works they influenced outside the Hollywood system. 1974 saw the release of the indie short film Jim Morrow and Joe Adamson's A Political Cartoon. The plot of the film centered around cartoon characters campaigning for equal rights on behalf of a cartoon presidential candidate named Peter President. Not only were the Looney Tunes referenced, but Bugs Bunny makes an appearance being voiced by Mel Blanc. His scenes were animated by noted animator and historian Mark Kosler.
How did you feel when you were put on sale here in this pet store?
How do you feel interviewing a rabbit?
The following year, animator Steve Peck released the crass Looney Tunes parody Rabbit Habits, a crudely animated Ralph Bakshi-esque take on the Bugs and Elmer formula where a junkie Bugs tries to outwit Elmer, here portrayed as a drug-dealing pimp.
Nah, I done touched the hard stuff. That's the bunk.
That's the bunk, all right. Wabbit twacks.
Peck showed the short to Tex Avery, who loved it. He also showed it to Chuck Jones, who hated it. Without meaning to, the Looney Tunes had woven themselves into the tapestry of film history. It would only make sense that the world of film would recognize them in kind.
The Eiffel Tower, the Taj Mahal, and Termite Terrace. Yes, Termite Terrace.
On December 19, 1975, the documentary film Bugs Bunny Superstar was released into theaters. The brainchild of producer and director Larry Jackson, the documentary's goal was to not only bring classic Looney Tunes shorts back into theaters, but to show audiences that the shorts were more than just Saturday morning programming. The production was entirely self-financed by Jackson maxing out his American Express card. Originally, his idea for a film was a Citizen Kane parody centered around Bugs Bunny, with a narration provided by Orson Welles himself, whom Jackson had recently struck up a friendship with. Wells was not too keen on this idea, so to keep him on board, Jackson retooled the idea into a documentary with classic Looney Tunes shorts wrapped around footage from the studio's golden age and interviews from directors Friz Freleng and Tex Avery. Chuck Jones and Robert McKimson were also contacted but could not be interviewed due to scheduling conflicts. Tying this all together would be the documentary's host.
You know, I have quite a taste for these.
Bob Clampett was the centerpiece by which this doc was structured around, being the gregarious master of ceremonies and storyteller with a goofball look that embodied the cartoon's spirit. He was almost too perfect for the role. Being that this was released by United Artists instead of Warner Brothers proper, the shorts were all pre-1948 shorts since UA owned those at the time. Jackson did try his hand at procuring some shorts that came afterwards, but Warner, who had just turned down Jackson for the project, were also not willing to license them out to him. Upon its theatrical release, Bugs Bunny Superstar was marketed with the tagline, "You won't believe how much you missed as a kid." According to Larry Jackson, this was a reference to how audiences were accustomed to watching censored versions of the Warner Brothers cartoons on television and were unaware of their larger, uncut histories. While its numbers at the box office are unknown, it got a positive reception from critics and audiences alike, particularly those who did remember seeing the old shorts in theaters and enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane. However, certain decisions in the making of the doc did have consequences. Because the history of animation was largely unwritten at that point, most animators had a special privilege given to them where they could toot their own horn, and Bob Clampett abused this privilege with gusto. To secure Clampett's participation and access to Clampett's private collection of Looney Tunes memorabilia, Larry Jackson had to sign a contract that stipulated Clampett would host the documentary, select the cartoons featured, and have approval over the final cut. This allowed Clampett, who already had a reputation as a yarn spinner at this point, to craft his own narrative. A lot of Warner Brothers animators were upset that Bugs Bunny Superstar seemed to portray Clampett as the true brains behind Termite Terrace. Friz Freleng was incensed at a particular shot in the film where Clampett tried to pass off one of Freleng's model sheets from I Haven't Got a Hat as one of his own. But the person who was most furious at this film was Clampett's former friend turned bitter rival, Chuck Jones. After a 1969 interview Clampett did with animation historian Michael Barrier, where he made dubious claims that he was the creator of characters like Porky Pig and Bugs Bunny, Jones's animosity towards his ex-compatriot had been freshly renewed. But now that he was on the big screen and shoveling the same bull to a mass audience, that was the final straw for Chuck. On December 11th, a week before Bugs Bunny Superstar was released to the public, Jones penned a letter to Tex Avery, venting his frustrations about Clampett, the movie, and enlisting Avery to back him up with annotations to prove that Bugs was the product of many animators, not just one, which Tex gladly did. Jones closed his letter with this statement: "Today we are constantly reminded of the immortality of our characters and the joy they have to the world. Must we now have to explain to our own grandchildren the truth of our beginnings in the face of the cheap claims of such immortal or amoral opportunism?" But then Jones realized that he had one thing over Clampett. Bob was retired. Chuck was not. Chuck still had his own studio that produced primetime specials for TV year after year. If he played his cards right, he could beat Clampett at his own game. At the dawn of the 70s, Warner Brothers farmed out their animation output to the notoriously thrifty animation studio Filmation. For the longest time, the only original Looney Tunes production was the 1972 ABC TV movie Daffy Duck and Porky Pig Meet the Groovy Ghoulies, a crossover where a loaned out Daffy and Porky meet Filmation's own Groovy Ghoulies. And despite having Mel Blanc return to provide the voices, audience reception was more ghouly than groovy.
Can we talk to you, Daffy?
Wouldn't you ever talk to my agent?
4 years later, once CBS reacquired the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour from ABC in one of the many back and forths between the two channels, the time was right to have the Looney Tunes perform on primetime once again, only classier this time.
Camille! Huh, ridiculous. Camille Sanson. Correct. Correct. And I suppose you pronounce St. Peter Song Christopher. Huh.
On November 22nd, 1976, the primetime special Bugs and Taffy's Carnival of Animals premiered on CBS. Directed by Chuck Jones and animated by his studio, the special was a purposeful throwback to the musical cartoons he directed. It also marked a re-establishment of the showbiz rivalry between Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
All right, you ungrateful peasants. Wait till you hear my arpeggios and my cadenzas, not to mention my sparkling repartee. Then we'll see who wins out in this applause bit.
Amidst the two stars' cartoon antics were readings of the poetry of Ogden Nash.
The nightingale sings a lullaby.
And the seagull sings a gullaby, right?
Lullaby? Gullaby.
And live-action performances of Camille Saint-Saëns' Carnival of the Animals Suite, as conducted and performed by Michael Tilson Thomas and his orchestra. It was the first Looney Tunes production Warner Brothers commissioned since the closure of the original studio, as well as the first new material featuring Bugs Bunny since 1964. The special was drenched in Jones's highbrow taste and philosophy for animating the characters. They were subtle and sophisticated, the opposite of Clampett's loud outrageousness. The difference best reflected in the two rivals. Jones went on Dick Cavett, while Clampett went on game shows. While Bugs Bunny Superstar catered in nostalgia and exploring the historical past of the franchise and characters, Jones's special was forward-thinking, showing that the Looney Tunes were not just mindless kiddie fare, but something that can be enjoyed by all ages, by all facets of society. Carnival of the Animals did well enough to catch the attention of CBS. One of the reasons they greenlit the project was that, even with their presence on Children's Saturday Morning, the Looney Tunes still had that appeal to adult audiences. Plus, the success of standalones such as the Peanut specials from Termite Terrace alumnus Bill Melendez meant that channels were always going to be hungry for similar specials to garner ratings and advertising revenue. For the rest of the 70s, CBS would commission several TV specials centered around the Looney Tunes. These specials would be shepherded under producer Hal Gear, a former Looney Tunes sound editor who eventually got promoted to the de facto head of all things Looney Tunes. These specials were as follows. In 1977, there was Bugs Bunny's Easter special on April 7th, Bugs Bunny in Space on September 6th, and Bugs Bunny's Halloween special on October 26th. 1978 had A Connecticut Rabbit in King Arthur's Court on February 23rd, and How Bugs Bunny Won the West on November 15th. In 1979, the peak of Looney Tunes TV specials had Bugs Bunny's Valentine on February 14th, the Bugs Bunny Mother's Day special on May 12th, Bugs Bunny's Thanksgiving Diet on November 15th, followed by Bugs Bunny's Looney Christmas Tales on November 27th. The structure of these specials comprised of the re-airing of shorts strung around by newly animated wraparounds of Bugs Bunny and his co-stars getting into hijinks involving the theme of the special, the only exception being Bugs Bunny in Space, which had no new original animation as it was fast-tracked and thrown together and deployed to cash in on the summer blockbuster movie hit that year, Star Wars. The animation of each of these were either helmed by Fritz Freeling's DePatie Freeling Studios or Chuck Jones's Chuck Jones Enterprises. Mel Blanc also returned to reprise his many roles, and while their presentation was constrained by television budgets of the time, they were successful enough in ratings to cause CBS to rerun them for years. If anything, the specials did their job in keeping the Looney Tunes fresh in people's minds all year round. But as the Looney Tunes brand was slowly being revitalized, it was still losing many of its storied creators to the march of time. Former director and Chuck Jones compatriot Abe Levitow died from a bone tumor at age 52 on May 8, 1975. Animation luminary Rod Scribner tragically spent most of his post-Termite Terrace years battling both TB and a heroin addiction, finally succumbing to the former in a psychiatric ward on December 21, 1976, at the age of 66. And, most shockingly, Robert McKimson died unexpectedly of a heart attack while having lunch with Fritz Freeling and David DePatie at age 66 on September 29, 1977. Ironically, he had just gotten a clean bill of health from his doctor 2 days ago and had been bragging about it to Freeling. What his doctor should have specified is that he had a clean bill of health for a 66-year-old lifelong smoker with emphysema. Chuck Jones, meanwhile, was still very much alive, and he was not done with the Looney Tunes just yet. He had helped spearhead the TV specials, but he still had bigger fish to fry. He had to one-up Bob Clampett. As one of his animators and close friends, Phil Monroe, put it, as much as some people disliked Bob, they didn't have the intensity of dislike that Jones had for him. It had only grown more intense as the years wore on. He would not be satisfied until he outdid Clampett's showing on Bugs Bunny Superstar, and he would do it by recreating that documentary through his own point of view. The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie was Jones's attempt to give his take on the Looney Tunes and their legacy. With Jones and Phil Monroe piloting the director's chair, the film was, in essence, a 97-minute TV special, a series of classic Looney Tunes shorts connected with a wraparound of original animation. Unlike the documentary style of Superstar, the wraparounds were fully animated and involved Bugs Bunny giving the audience a tour of his stately mid-century modern manor while discussing some of the rivalries that made him famous. Bugs here is basically the mouthpiece for Jones pontificating about the nature of the chase, and how it was essential to not just the formula of the Looney Tunes cartoons, but to the comedy film as a whole, a point made obvious in the film's original title, The Great American Chase. This thesis comes to a head at the very end, where the final short is an extended chase sequence between the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie was also a means for Chuck to set the record straight on who created Bugs Bunny. Instead of his creation being credited to just one singular creator, Bugs' birth was credited to several fathers, as he put it, artists who quite literally made him into the rabbit you see today. Guess who he doesn't mention?
Fathers with odd names like Tex Avery, Frizz Freeling, Chuck Jones, and Bob McKimson. The ones who directed most of me pictures.
Unlike Superstar, the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie was funded by Warner Brothers. Therefore, all the shorts shown had to be from the post-1948 package. Warner Brothers initially figured it would be fast-tracked to being a TV movie, but once they saw the final product Jones and his team did and how well it did in test markets, they decided to go fully theatrical, the perfect film to ring in Bugs Bunny's 40th anniversary next year. After a showing at the New York Film Festival, Jones's package film would make its true theatrical debut at New York City's Guild Theater on September 28, 1979. The film began with a perturbed Bugs looking at the classic That's All Folks and rewriting it to say, That's Not All Folks. A bold statement telling the captive audience that the Looney Tunes story was not ancient history. Though they reflected on their past glories, they were still here in the present, making their presence known. When Bugs Bunny's Looney Christmas Tales hit the airwaves, it came with a special surprise. The entire special consisted of 3 brand new, never-before-seen Looney Tunes shorts: Bugs Bunny's Christmas Carol and The Fright Before Christmas by Frizz Freeling, and Freeze Frame by Chuck Jones. It was a Christmas miracle. For the first time in over a decade, the Looney Tunes had brand new shorts with 2 of their original directors behind them, and as America ascended into the next decade, the Looney Tunes were making a statement. They were here to stay.
And finally, all will once again be peaceful and quiet. Or will it?
To assist me in presenting the next award, one of the most honored characters in the history of animated cartoons.
Fooled you, didn't we? Some crowd.
On August 26, 1980, Tex Avery went to work at his job at Hanna-Barbera Studios. He had been laid off from his job in advertising after Cascade closed their cartooning department in 1978. Wanting to help an old colleague from their MGM days, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera offered him a secure position at their own studio. Avery, who had turned down multiple offers from Frizz Freeling and Chuck Jones to work on Looney Tunes specials at their own studios, accepted. Avery was despondent in this period of his life. Not only was he having to work on cartoons well below his pay grade like Wiki Koala, but he was also reflecting on how his career got to this point. He regretted that he was never able to achieve his true dream of becoming a newspaper cartoonist, and his attitude towards his past work had soured. He could only focus on the mistakes he had made and the burnout those shorts had caused him. Exacerbating those feelings was Joe Barbera's poor treatment of Avery. According to animator Ben Washam, probable cause was leftover envy from their studio days, saying, That SOB Joe is still mad to this day that it took two of them to make a cartoon that was even half as funny as one of Tex's. In this period of life, Tex sought refuge in the bottle. He would often spend his lunch hour and after hours in the bar across the street from the animation studio, reminiscing about better days with other fellow Golden Age animators that wound up at Hanna-Barbera. According to one young animator, Kevin Petrolak, he had gone up to Avery one day and talked with him. After some conversation and an autograph, Petrolak asked Avery what's a legend like him doing in a place like this. Avery responded with a laugh, "Hey, don't you know, this is where us old elephants come to die." It was the attitude he carried with him as he went to work that Tuesday morning in August. But as he was walking from the parking lot to the building, Avery collapsed. An ambulance was called and he was immediately rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, the same place Walt Disney died. Almost immediately, doctors found the cause. It was lung cancer. It had gone unnoticed for so long and spread so fast, it was too late to save Avery. That night in his hospital, Tex spent the evening watching baseball with two of his animator buddies who came to visit him, one of them being Chuck Jones. As he watched the ball game on the hospital TV set, Avery ruminated, "I don't know where animators go when they die, but I guess there must be a lot of them. They could probably use a good director though," before he slowly drifted off to sleep. He would not wake up. The death of Tex Avery sent shockwaves throughout the animation profession. The man who perfected the comedic style the Looney Tunes cartoons were known for had now passed on from this world. But out of everyone, the people hit hardest by this passing were his old colleagues and friends. At his funeral, among those in attendance were Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, Bob Clampett, Bill Melendez, Virgil Ross, and most of the other surviving Termite Terrace animators. It would be the last time all of them would be in the same place together. Not long afterwards, animator Manny Perez and storyboarder Michael Maltese would follow Tex the next year, passing away on January 18th at age 66 and February 22nd at age 73 respectively. The year after that, Termite Terrace founder Hugh Harman would pass on at age 79 on November 25th, 1982, after a bout of long illness. Mark Hosler says Hugh still owes him $400. And Treg Brown, the architect of Warner Brothers sound effects library, would die 2 years later on April 28, 1984, at age 84. But while the specter of death was hanging over the remaining Termite Terrace crew, the Looney Tunes franchise was breathing with new life. The success of the primetime specials and the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie showed Warner Brothers that their former theatrical shorts were more than just Saturday morning filler. It was high time for an investment. To this end, they turned to specials producer Hal Gear to steer them into the future. On May 15, 1980, Hal Gear founded the studio Warner Brothers Animation, a grand reopening of the Warner's on-site animation studio 17 years after the original closed. And while they hired younger animation talent, direction would be headed by former Warner veterans such as Art Davis and Jerry Chinicki. Coinciding with this would see the final Looney Tunes TV specials outsourced to other studios, with Daffy Duck's Easter Egg Excitement from Patty Freleng releasing on April 1st, and Bugs Bunny's Bustin' Out All Over from Chuck Jones Enterprises releasing on May 21st. These two specials are noteworthy as, like with the Christmas special, they were comprised of brand new Looney Tunes shorts. The former had The Yolk's on You, The Chocolate Chase, and Daffy Flies North, while the latter had Supersonic, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Bunny, and Spaced Out Bunny. Like always, Mel Blanc would reprise all his roles.
Oh no, not again!
The first order of business for the newly christened Warner Brothers Animation was animating the tunes for commercials, whether they be ads for 9 Lives cat food or public service announcements about fire safety.
True or false? Under the bed is the best place to go during a fire.
That's false. You should never hide under the bed.
The new animation studio grew almost immediately, especially with the addition of a returning Friz Freleng. Freleng and David DePatie had sold DePatie Freleng Enterprises to Marvel Comics in 1981, where the studio would be renamed to Marvel Productions. DePatie would make the transition over to become the studio's head, and would have a hand in producing and co-producing some of the big Saturday morning cartoon staples of the 1980s. Friz Freleng returned to Warner Bros. Animation, where he joined gear to become executive producer. After the releases of the Bugs Bunny Mystery Special and Daffy Duck's Thanks for Giving Special in 1980, Bugs Bunny All-American Hero in 1981, and Bugs Bunny's Mad World of Television in 1982, Warner Bros. Animation had produced enough specials for broadcasters to run ad nauseum throughout the year. Now was the time to take the tunes back to the big screen.
Here's that lovable star, a favorite around the world, Mr. Show Business himself, Mr. Bug Dummy.
The success of the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie was too big to ignore. It brought in the money, but the more important thing in its favor was that it was cheap to produce and thus could make a bigger profit. Thus, similar Looney Tunes package films were commissioned. These films not only cost peanuts, but they were produced in a similar fashion to the primetime specials. All they had to do was take a concept, choose the right Looney Tunes shorts for it, and tie them together with original animated wraparounds, making them cheap and fast to produce. Between 1981 to 83, Warner Bros. Animation released 3 Looney Tunes package films, all of which were directed by Friz Freleng, with Phil Monroe co-directing the third. The first, 1981's The Looney Bugs Bunny Movie, was a loose collection of shorts and wraparounds with Bugs Bunny doing another history lesson like the previous 2 films, before going into 3 separate anthology stories, Yosemite Sam being reincarnated throughout history, Bugs Bunny doing an Elliot Ness style takedown on Rocky and Muggsy, and a riff on the Oscars. 1982 had Bugs Bunny's third movie, 1001 Rabbit Tales. This compilation film was the first to drop any historical element in favor of a wholly original story where the cartoon shorts act as a part of it, this being Bugs and Daffy as traveling book salesmen, complete with the expected hijinks, which somehow leads to Bugs being saddled with the role of storyteller to Sultan Yosemite Sam's spoiled brat of a son, hence the title. And finally, 1983 had Daffy Duck's Fantastic Island. The first compilation film to center on Daffy, the film followed roughly the same format as the previous movie, with the story being a riff on the then popular primetime TV show, Fantasy Island.
Look, boss, the plane! The plane!
While these films did generate reliable revenue, they were criticized for being rip-offs considering all the shorts were post-1948 shorts. Those were already in constant rotation on Saturday morning programs. Also, what little new animation footage there was available was clearly done on a TV budget. It showed that while Warner Bros. Did see the characters as a dependable brand, they were still wary about giving their new animation studio too much money. What they did have was money for new media ventures that benefited from the advent of new technology.
Step into the world of tomorrow with Hitachi, an innovative world of electronics, determined to take you beyond ordinary video cassette recording.
Though it got its start in the 70s, videotape technology did not have its commercial boom until the early 80s when VCRs became a household item. This gave rise to a new area of film distribution, the home video industry. Back then, film studios would lease out their catalog to an outside distributor and receive royalties for each videotape sold. Warner Bros., on the other hand, wanted to cut out the middleman entirely and founded their own video distribution company, WCI Home Video, in 1979. As with many home video services, WCI were focused primarily on the rental market as the price for individual tapes could range from $50 to $75, around $160 to $240 when adjusted for inflation. At the start of the decade, they began putting out videos of their biggest hit films from the previous decade. Among those classics was 1979's The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie. It not only was an instant smash for the burgeoning rental market, but thanks to its retail price being on the low end of $49.95, it was also a hit in direct consumer sales, netting 20,000 copies sold in its first year, huge for the early video market. This prompted WCI to make the Looney Tunes the centerpiece of their home video division. They didn't stop at releasing just the recent package films. 1981 had the multi-volume A Night at the Movie set, which shone the spotlight on films from the studio's golden age. To replicate the vintage movie-going experience, included along with the movie were a newsreel, coming attractions, and a complete Warner Bros. Cartoon short, this being the first time they were released uncut outside of theaters. The next November saw a more lasting presentation of their characters with the launch of the Looney Tunes video show line. The first Looney Tunes home video collection, each volume consisted of 7 post-1948 Looney Tunes shorts, each one having varied stars, highlighted by at least one Bugs Bunny short. 7 volumes were released priced at $39.95 each. Even with the steep price tag for 7 7-minute shorts, the video show line sold like gangbusters, with each collection selling between 10 to 12,000 copies. The video show line would later be succeeded by 1985's Golden Jubilee collection, which expanded the number of shorts to 8, included some of the black and white shorts, and whose volumes were centered around specific characters and directors. That line would be succeeded by 1989's Cartoon Cavalcade, which included the first restored prints of the shorts. The home video gold rush also brought with it a dark side. Since home video first began, all sorts of independent companies crawled out of the woodwork to make a quick buck exploiting the public domain. The 121 Looney Tunes shorts that had fallen in there were certainly no exception. Shady companies under nondescript names like VidTape Inc. and United American Video would churn out simple compilations of public domain Looney Tunes shorts, usually 4 shorts a pop, using the messiest looking prints they could find, packaged in the cheapest material they could use, plastered with the ugliest art they could create, and listed under the most unimaginative titles they could type up. Some cartoon collectors have gone to bat for these collections. For one, it did help keep a lot of these shorts from falling through the cracks, although some of these shorts were the censored 11 which were often thoughtlessly put onto these videos. And credit can be given to cult music label Rhino Records for using this environment to make the private snafu shorts available to the public. But let's not pretend they weren't naked ploys by unscrupulous slick operators who wanted to bilk a couple of bucks out of some cheapskate parents who didn't mind settling for less if it meant distracting their brood for 30 minutes. The home video business was still revolutionary in how it revitalized interest in old movies and cartoons. One of the beneficiaries of this was Bob Clampett. At 70 years old, he was still making time for the new generation of animators and animation fans, sharing his stories and lessons for anyone willing to listen. In the spring of 1984, Clampett would embark on a media tour to promote RCA Columbia's home video release of his old Beanie and Cecil show. During a scheduled stop in Detroit, Michigan, though, Clampett was suddenly struck by a heart attack. He would be rushed over to the Detroit Receiving Hospital, but it was too late. Bob Clampett died on May 2, 1984, 6 days before his 71st birthday. Clampett's passing was mourned throughout the animation community, but there was one person who stayed silent. It's unknown if Bob or Chuck ever buried the hatchet between the two of them, especially since they had the chance 4 years ago at Tex Avery's funeral. Considering Jones has never talked about his rival's passing, and the fact that even his friends have described him as a vindictive person who held long-seated grudges, all signs point to no. If anything, he was probably too busy helping make Chipmunk specials and cameoing in Joe Dante films to properly mourn. But even with home video, Warner Brothers still branched out with the Looney Tunes brand, even if they weren't always successful. Warner Communications owned the big video game developer Atari, who dominated the home console market through most of the early 80s. In 1983, they would release Taz, the first official Looney Tunes video game. However, Warner couldn't enjoy what little success they gave them since owning Atari soon became an albatross around their necks that same year. Warner even loaned the characters out for an ambitious themed restaurant called Gadgets. Built as a direct competitor to other entertainment-themed restaurants at the time like Showbiz Pizza Place, Gadgets was notable not just for its gay 90s revival theming or its laboratory-themed bar for adults, but also with how the Looney Tunes were their official mascots. Their menus were set up like an old Looney Tunes comic, and the animatronic band consisted of 9 Looney Tunes characters with over 50 show tapes recorded, all voiced by Mel Blanc.
Oh, Sherry, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand. Then I'll say that something. I want to hold your hand.
The venture proved to be too costly to run in the end, and the video game's crash of 1983 caused Gadgets to be rethemed to a more straightforward adult bar. The Looney Tunes would, of course, not be part of this rebrand. That rebrand only delayed the inevitable for Gadgets, and it finally shut down in 1992. As the 80s wore on, Warner's many ventures with the Looney Tunes brought in dollars, but it seemed like they had no more room to grow. As it turns out, Warner was in the red, and were selling off assets to keep their heads above water. Suffering substantial losses due to the video game's crash, Warner Communications spun off Atari Inc. into its own company to stop the bleeding. They also sold off most of the cable network venture that they had formed in 1979 with credit card company American Express, called Warner Amex Satellite Entertainment. They had a few small early cable TV channels under their belts, such as MTV, VH1, and Nickelodeon, that they didn't see as financially viable in the long term. So, Warner would buy out Amex's stake in the venture and sell off the assets to a company called Viacom for a combined $326 million, an acquisition that would be completed on May 20th, 1986. Hopefully, Viacom would have a better go with those channels. Moreover, Ronald Reagan's deregulation of television made Saturday mornings on broadcast TV a battleground. Bugs Bunny and friends were now facing stiff competition from the new class of shiny new cartoons built to market shiny new toys for kids. And while the tunes had similar marketability, it was not to this level. The Looney Tunes had moved back to ABC after 10 years on CBS, starting September 7th, 1985, rebranding once again as the Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes Comedy Hour before rebranding permanently to the Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show the next year. But compared to all the new shows they were surrounded by, one could not shake the perception that they were long in the tooth, especially since these were still the same post-1948 shows that had been airing for over 2 decades now. Warner Bros. Animation was also entering untested waters because, in 1986, Friz Freleng would step down from his head producer role and finally retire from the industry at age 81. Hal Gear would follow him to retirement the next year. Freleng would hand off duties to Kathleen Helpy Shipley, his trusted secretary and the voice of Butterbear on the Wuzzles. She would end up becoming the longest tenured producer of the Looney Tunes franchise behind Leon Schlesinger. It was the mid-80s and the Looney Tunes brand had hit a ceiling. Warner Brothers' losses over the years would now be someone else's gain. Enter Robert Edward Turner III. His friends called him Ted. A Georgia-born businessman who grew his father's billboard business into radio and TV, Ted Turner had slowly been amassing a media empire to call his own since the 70s. He had turned his independent WTCG station into one of the first satellite channels in 1976, later to be known as Superstation TBS, and launched the first 24-hour news cable channel in 1980 called CNN. By the mid-80s, Turner was already a titan of the media industry, but he had only just begun his conquest. On March 25, 1986, Ted and his company, Turner Broadcasting System, purchased the studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer from CEO Kurt Kerkorian for a whopping $1.5 billion. Various debts ultimately forced Turner to give back the studio lot and MGM name to Kerkorian after a month of ownership, but he was still able to strike up a favorable deal. For his purchase, Ted Turner would be able to keep the studio's film, television, and cartoon library, and a small portion of United Artists' film library, MGM and UA having merged in 1981 in a desperate bid to keep both companies afloat. This meant that, on top of all the MGM stuff Turner owned, he also owned a United Artists library that consisted of the original Popeye shorts, most of the Gilligan's Island franchise, and most, if not all, of the pre-August 1948 Looney Tunes and Merrie Melody shorts that Warner had sold several decades ago. Turner had hit pay dirt. These were all the pieces Turner needed for his master plan. With the library he acquired from MGM UA, he founded Turner Entertainment Company on August 2, 1986. There, Turner would utilize the library for both his TBS channel and a new upcoming one. On October 6, 1987, Ted Turner announced in a keynote address at the Atlantic Cable Show that he would be creating a new basic cable network. It was to center around major television events, movies from the MGM library, television specials, sports, documentaries, and anything else that was residing in the now vast Turner Entertainment library. It was to be called Turner Network Television, or TNT for short.
Classic movies, original programming, special events. Turner Network Television, TNT. Coming this fall, only on cable.
TNT launched the next year on October 3rd at 7:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It began with a statement by Ted Turner detailing the goals of the network, followed by a pre-recorded performance of the national anthem, as was tradition for the launching of a Turner-owned network, followed by the inaugural telecast of the first half of the 1939 classic blockbuster Gone with the Wind. The mission of TNT was to act as a jack-of-all-trades TV channel, designed for showcasing the classics of cinema and television that Turner had in their library, and among those were the cartoon shorts they had acquired. Turner had been running pre-1948 Looney Tunes on his Superstation via syndication deal since 1980. They would run every morning alongside the Popeye and Three Stooges theatrical shorts that acted as the children's entertainment block. He had a similar plan for TNT. TNT's children programming in the beginning consisted of airings of The Muppet Show and Fraggle Rock, which Ted Turner had acquired through a 4-year deal with the Jim Henson Company. It would also consist of a daily morning block of cartoon shorts that included Popeye, MGM cartoons, the Patty Freeling cartoons, and naturally the Looney Tunes in the Turner Library as part of a block called TNT Wild World of Shorts.
It's colossal. It's stupendous.
A full hour and a half of your favorite cartoons.
Well, blow me down.
It's the Wild World of Shorts, tonight at 6 Eastern on TNT.
The Looney Tunes were a special case as they had gotten their own block within the block called Bugs Bunny and Pals, an implicit endorsement by the network to show that they were a cut above the rest. Ted Turner was not the only beneficiary of the Looney Tunes' presence on basic cable. Remember that sale Warner made to Viacom? When it started out in 1979, Nickelodeon was a channel initially seen as a PBS for cable, a home for programming that was meant to both educate as well as entertain. That changed in 1984 when, through a shakeup in management, new channel head Geraldine "Jerry" Laybourne shifted the channel's vision to be more about fun and kid empowerment. They were the first kids network after all. This meant they actively sought out animated programming to license. At first, Laybourne prioritized licensing cartoons you couldn't get elsewhere. Most animated programming on Nickelodeon at the time were imported cartoons from Europe and Japanese anime. It didn't hurt that the licensing costs for those shows were relatively inexpensive. But with the surprise success of their 1986 game show Double Dare, Nickelodeon came into some serious spending money. That meant they could now afford more premium syndication packages, one of these being the Looney Tunes.
Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Daffy, Speedy, Sylvester, Bugs, Tweety, and more. Just when you need them. Every day after school at 5/4 Central starting tomorrow. On the network with more of what you want. Nickelodeon.
Looney Tunes made their Nickelodeon premiere on September 11, 1988, with a 3-hour marathon called Nickelodeon Goes Looney. The shorts aired daily on the channel in a late afternoon half-hour block. Since Warner Brothers gave exclusivity rights to the big three networks for the best quality shorts they owned, it meant that Nickelodeon's package was a mishmash of more obscure shorts from the series' 40-year history. Meaning, hope you like Bosco and 60 Speedy Gonzales cartoons, kids. Looney Tunes was, however, quick to establish itself as a network staple. This was due to its cross-generational appeal that spanned 3 generations. The kids who watched Looney Tunes had parents and possibly grandparents who grew up with the original shorts. It was the reason why, even with their parent company's personal struggles, the Looney Tunes were able to finally find their way back into the Hollywood limelight. On January 14, 1986, CBS aired the special Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes 50th Anniversary in primetime. Despite being off by a year or 6, it did show the Looney Tunes had a lasting effect on Tinseltown. In between interviews with Friz Freleng, Chuck Jones, and Mel Blanc, there were also interviews with huge A-listers of the day like Steve Martin, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Penny Marshall, Quincy Jones, David Bowie, and Cher among others explaining their fandom with the Looney Tunes, mostly through talking about them as if they were actual living, breathing Hollywood stars, which they are.
Bugs never did anything for anybody that didn't serve Bugs Bunny. That's why he's a star.
In late 1987, the Warner Brothers short The Duxorcist premiered into theaters, the first short ever to do so since 1969. The plot involved paranormal investigator Daffy Duck trying to solve Melissa Duck's haunted house problem, as well as her own ghastly possession.
Mary had a little lamb, but I ate it!
The short would be the warm-up act for Warner Brothers' big holiday movie that year, the forgotten Barbra Streisand-Richard Dreyfuss legal drama Nuts. If reception was anything to go by, the film was completely overshadowed by its opening act.
So I hope it shows the exhibitors how much people do love cartoons. I'd like to see them come back.
Well, I'd like to see him come back.
The short was directed by animators Greg Ford and Terry Lennon. Ford was the short's main driver. He had been enlisted by Warner Brothers to write the new cartoon short because they were impressed by his deep, intimate knowledge of the Looney Tunes characters. Not just who they were, but also how they were drawn, how they moved, and how they interacted with each other. It would lead him and Lennon to direct what would be the next and final package film, Daffy Duck's Quackbusters. Released to theaters on September 24th, 1988, the theme of the film was Warner Brothers cartoon shorts involving monsters and the supernatural, with a wraparound involving Daffy using an inheritance to start a paranormal investigation firm, with the unwilling help of Bugs, Porky, and Sylvester. Ford and Lennon would also debut another short of theirs to start off the movie, The Night of the Living Duck. 1988 would indeed be the year the Looney Tunes franchise would make a huge comeback to the larger culture thanks to a showing on the big screen. That showing was not Daffy Duck's Quackbusters, however.
Eddie Valiant, you're under arrest!
Debuting that summer, Disney's Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a loving tribute to film noir and the golden age of animation. Executive producer Steven Spielberg, director Robert Zemeckis, and head animation supervisor Richard Williams were all people who had grown up with that era, and their influence had fully informed the humor of their work.
Why, nobody gets the drop on Roger Rabbit!
The story of investigator Eddie Valiant being forced to work on a case to prevent star Toon Roger Rabbit from being framed for murder was not just a compelling premise, but also a golden opportunity to fill the world with cartoons from the old animated films of Disney, MGM, Fleischer, and no doubt Warner Brothers.
This little pitty had roast beef, and this little pitty had... ran out of pitties.
And while Disney were the primary moneymen behind this production, a lot of the inspiration for the general direction and animation of the film were the Warner Brothers shorts and the style they pioneered. The film included cameos by multiple Looney Tunes stars, most notably Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny.
Here's the spare.
Thank you. Ah, no! Ah, poor fella.
Yeah, ain't I a stinker?
There was a stipulation by Disney that, since both of these characters were so big, that they can only appear if they shared the same screen time as their respective Disney counterparts, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. One of these scenes also aroused a minor controversy within the Warner ranks. For the dueling piano scene with Daffy and Donald, Chuck Jones was originally hired to do the storyboards. This was both for admiration for the man and the Warner heads wanting his Daffy to be on screen for better brand synergy. Chuck's subtle comedy, though, was not what the Roger Rabbit creative staff were looking for, and opted instead for a more period-accurate madcap tone animated by Warner animator Mark Kosler. Jones was not happy to learn that his boards were not used, and would later say of Roger Rabbit's $50 million budget, "All that money wasted on that." This was not a shocking statement coming from him, as the style of Daffy they leaned into more was the Daffy utilized by the late Bob Clampett. Not even the grave could keep Clampett from getting one over on Chuck. Even though Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse had to share screen space, to call them equals was a stretch. They were equals in terms of recognition, sure. Being animated icons for multiple decades will do that to you. But in terms of widespread appeal, Bugs and the gang may have had Mickey and pals licked. There was a key difference between the rabbit and the mouse, and that was accessibility. For over 30 years, Warner Brothers and other companies knew the value of the Looney Tunes and did their best to always keep them in the public's eye, even after the original shorts stopped. And as the years ticked by, the characters were led down new avenues. By the end of the 80s, their shorts were airing on broadcast networks, 2 cable networks, and had multiple volumes in the growing industry of home video, whether they were legitimate or not. Disney, meanwhile, had grown cautious in that same time frame. The death of Walt had made them skittish to readily embrace new media opportunities, namely because they were afraid that more accessibility could potentially cheapen and therefore damage their carefully crafted brand. So while Disney hid their subjects behind the walled gardens of limited re-releases, pricey home video sets, and premium cable networks, Bugs and the crew were free to conquer the media landscape that lay before them. And with Roger Rabbit being the high tide to raise all the chips from the golden age of animation, the Looney Tunes ship looked to be the highest of them all. Tragically, as they marched out of the 80s, they would lose a key part of their identity along the way. The decade began with one painful death, and it would end with another. Mel Blanc had been voicing the lion's share of the Looney Tunes cast for over 50 years now. What was once a side project from his radio career ended up becoming his main gig. And while he would go on to voice other memorable characters like Barney Rubble, Cosmo Spacely, and Heathcliff, Blanc would always find time to return to give life to those stable of characters that made him famous. But as the seasons changed, so did the voices of Blank's characters. It was a simple fact that time was taking its toll on these performances. Mel had also been a pack-a-day smoker since the age of 9, and had only just quit smoking in 1985 after being diagnosed with emphysema. While he was a tireless worker, Blank's age was causing his once limitless voice to sound increasingly limited, highlighted whenever the package films switched from the wraparounds to the actual vintage shorts.
Anyone that works with me should never get me riled. Oh, and why not? Because I'm a split personality. That's why not.
Mel Blanc still soldiered on though. He reprised all his roles for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with the notable exception of Yosemite Sam. He had handed over that role to stand-up comedian and up-and-coming voice actor Joe Alasky, a foreboding sign of things to come. It was May 19, 1989. Mel and his son Joel had just finished shooting a commercial for Oldsmobile. Joel had noticed his dad had been coughing profusely during shooting and suggested he duck out early to go see a doctor since his shots were already in the can. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, doctors suggested Blank stay overnight for a better diagnosis, which he agreed to. That night, Blank fell out of his hospital bed and broke his femur. He was later diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That, combined with his injury, forced Blank to extend his stay. Doctors initially expected the voice actor to recover, but Mel soon took a turn for the worse after it was discovered that he had advanced coronary artery disease on top of everything else. On July 10th at 2:30 p.m., almost 2 months after he had checked himself into the hospital, Mel Blanc died of complications from all of the above. He was 81 years old. Blanc was interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, his gravestone reading the phrase, "That's all, folks," that he had helped popularize as stipulated in his will. Since he had died in the middle of recording his lines for next year's Jetsons the movie, Blank's lines had to be finished by voice actor Jeff Bergman. It was a sad note to end the decade out on. Right when the Looney Tunes were on the verge of new life, they lose an integral part of their identity. Mel Blanc, the man who had given those characters their character, the voice of a generation, now silenced forever. But the franchise still had to press onward. They had lost numerous key figures over the decade, even during their heyday. The Looney Tunes would soldier on and rebuild without Mel Blanc, and not a moment too soon. As the clock struck 12 on their final night of 1989, Warner Brothers had big plans in store for their short subject characters. Plans that would see them become the true faces of Warner Brothers.
You're despicable.
Still going. Long-lasting Energizer batteries keep going and going.
On March 4th, 1989, Warner Communications made the announcement that they were planning to merge with Time Incorporated, America's leading book and magazine publisher. Both Warner CEO Steve Ross and Time CEO J. Richard Monroe had been hashing out merger plans for 2 years up to that point, and agreed that their companies had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Warner Communications had spent the latter half of the 80s wrangling with various money woes, bearing the brunt of the video games crash of '83 with their ownership of Atari, and their failed venture into cable with American Express that only left them with the basic infrastructure of Warner Cable. Though they were still the #1 movie and record producer in the country thanks to Ross's tenure as CEO, financial hardship had left the business side stagnating and vulnerable to takeovers, having barely fought off one from Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation just 6 years earlier. Time Incorporated, meanwhile, was awash in cash. Their magazine empire, which not only included their namesake Time, but also Life, Sports Illustrated, Fortune, and People magazine, among others, also owned one of the largest book publishing operations, as well as the long-running Book of the Month Club. Time had also been unexpected pioneers in the world of premium cable, with their ownership of the network Home Box Office, or HBO for short. That was the side of the business both companies wanted to expand with the merger. Warner wanted to re-enter the world of cable to get more use out of their provider company, while Time wanted to make up for its failed attempt to acquire CNN in 1987 and its subsequent loss of its ownership stake in the USA Network. Plus, Time Incorporated would be expanding their business into music and movies, and Warner would be getting a magazine publishing empire, back when that mattered. The news rocked the media landscape. CBS's Vice President for Communications, George F. Schweitzer, said that the merger was another example of how their competitors could become mass communication complexes, while the big three broadcasting networks were held back by what he saw as unfair, outmoded government regulations. Ross was especially a target from Wall Street. During his tenure as Warner CEO, he had replaced the slick, money-hungry showbiz huckster image of Jack Warner with a brand new type of sweet-talking asshole. The corporate boardroom schmoozer who ran his conglomerate like a gangster ran his criminal empire. The man who saw reality as a business and conformed to its laws of nature. For this, critics assailed him for this merger, accusing him of only using the merger to exploit his own shareholders and line his own pockets with lavish executive compensation, $78 million it would turn out. They also said that the prestigious Time brand would only be devalued in the hand of such avarice, charges that were not abetted by Ross's run-ins with the mafia that would still pop up on occasion. Paramount even tried to make a saving throw by attempting a hostile takeover of Time in December of 1989 with a lofty $12.1 billion offer, but Time Incorporated would block that by making their price tag $14 billion. With no other buyers, Warner and Time merged on January 10, 1990, and gave birth to the company Time Warner. This merger would end up being a painful thorn in Steve Ross's side for the rest of his days. Despite his assurances to skeptical brokers and shareholders that it would work out in the long run, the merger had accrued a whopping $11.4 billion debt for the new company. It also saddled Ross with a co-CEO, N.J. Nicholas Jr., who he did not trust and saw as a reticent bean counter. On top of that, there was the actual painful thorn in his side in the form of a vicious, agonizing case of prostate cancer. It was currently spreading up his spine, and it would eventually kill him. Ross was at death's door by 1992, but before he could go to that burning executive office down below, he had one last magic trick. He engineered a huge boardroom shakeup that replaced Nicholas with one of his guys, Time Warner's vice chairman, Gerald M. Levin. Steve Ross would then die that December 21st, leaving Levin as the new CEO. Unlike Nicholas, Levin was a visionary, and his various plans were already well underway. The face of those plans? The Looney Tunes.
What's up, Doc?
Huh? You're not a cop?
Okay, you win. You got me dead to rights.
The Time Warner era for Looney Tunes began with Bugs and Daffy appearing in the ambitious and infamous half-hour anti-drug PSA Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, which aired on April 21st, 1990 across all children's channels. There, kids got to see Bugs team up with their other favorite Saturday morning stars like Garfield, Alf, the Chipmunks, Winnie the Pooh, and Michelangelo to deliver the important message of why hanging out at arcades and smoking weed is so not cool, my dudes.
But I make them feel good. I make them...
Sure, drugs make you feel good for a while, but that's only temporary, because sooner or later... Is that what you want, Doc?
Bugs, Porky, and Tweety would also make an appearance in ABC's Earth Day special the next night, where he would talk about more pressing issues.
I live on the Earth. I ought to know. Pesticides, toxics. I tell you, these days, it's a shame. A rabbit like me has to wash his own carrots.
2 months later, he and Daffy would make an on-screen cameo in Joe Dante's sequel to Gremlins, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Chuck Jones would once again have his services enlisted in animating his two stars. These appearances were all part of an ongoing celebration of Bugs Bunny's 50th birthday. After 50 years since the premiere of A Wild Hare on July 27th, the Squee Wabbit had now become an established and inescapable icon of popular culture, best exemplified by the CBS special that aired on August 15th, Happy Birthday Bugs, 50 Looney Years. The hour-long special consisted of clips from the best moments of Bugs Bunny's cartoons, intersped with a subplot about Daffy, naturally, resenting all the attention Bugs is getting, and a murderer's row of celebrities lining up to wish the rabbit a very happy birthday.
That's not all, folks.
We want more.
That's not all, folks. We want more.
That's not all, folks. We want more.
While the special was more economical in the production sense, a lot of the animation was reused footage from a previous special, 1988's Bugs vs. Daffy Battle of the Music Video Stars. It was still a respectful presentation of how important Bugs Bunny and the rest of the Looney Tunes were as pop cultural mainstays. It also doubled as a memorial tribute to the late Mel Blanc, celebrating not just the characters he voiced, but also the voice himself. Mel Blanc's absence was the cloud that hung over the festivities. His successor, though, was more than ready to take up the mantle. Jeff Bergman was a young up-and-comer in the voice acting world, but he had already had a faithful encounter with Blanc years ago. When Mel had given a lecture at the University of Pittsburgh in 1981, Bergman had tracked him down at his Oakland hotel room and gave an impromptu audition where he imitated his characters. Blanc, not calling the police, was impressed, and the two of them formed a friendship. 5 years later, Jeff would have his first gig voicing the Pillsbury Doughboy, replacing late voice actor Paul Frees in the role. He still attempted to get auditions with Warner Brothers, who declined him at first. It wasn't until he recorded an audition tape and took it to the production company to play it, toggling back and forth between his line readings and Mel's. Then Warner TV president Ed Blyer was stunned, as he could not tell the difference between the two of them. Bergman's position as successor was secure. Bergman would provide the voices of Bugs, Daffy, Sylvester, Tweety, Elmer, Yosemite Sam, and Foghorn Leghorn, among others. He would make his grand debut as Bugs Bunny at the 1990 Academy Awards.
But the best part of being animated is I'm never unemployed. And from the looks of it, these nominees won't be either.
With a good reception of The Duxorcist and The Night of the Living Duck, Warner figured out that more shorts of that caliber were needed. Daffy had warmed up the audience, so now the real star could take the stage.
If you haven't got a ticket, I must ask you to weave.
Ask me to weave? What about you? Where's your ticket, Mac?
Me? I don't have a ticket.
No ticket?
It must be here someplace.
No ticket, eh? Well, you've got one now.
Box Office Bunny was the first Bugs Bunny short released in the theaters in over 25 years. Directed by animator Daryl Van Sitters, the short sees Bugs waking up to see a massive Cineplex constructed over his burrow, and is handed by a power-tripping usher, Elmer Fudd, who thinks he snuck in, all while being egged on by actual movie hopper Daffy Duck. Box Office Bunny would preview on November 27th as part of the premiere of Warner's holiday movie that year, the Glenn Close Jeremy Irons-helmed legal drama Reversal of Fortune, all just so it could qualify for that year's Oscars. It would be given an official release next year, where it played before The Neverending Story 2, the next chapter. Other shorts would soon follow, two of them directed by the Ford Lennon team again. 1991's Blooper Bunny, a lighthearted skewering of last year's Hullabaloo by showing off the blooper reel for Bugs' 51.5th birthday.
Expect a call from my attorneys about this unfortunate incident. And brother, when they call, you'd better...
Now can we cut?
You smug son of a...
And 1992's Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers, a horror-based short where Bugs' daily routine with his usual antagonists is shaken up when he sees them replaced by pale imitations. It aired as part of the 1992 television special Bugs Bunny's Creature Features.
Yes? What's up, Doc? You know something, folks? This is the scariest part of the picture.
As for network TV, the Bugs and Tweety shows still ran like clockwork, but Warner Brothers' big stride in that area starred a new generation of tunes. Back in the 80s, Warner Brothers' then president, Terry Semel, felt that Warner Brothers Animation needed a jolt of new energy. His proposal? A show based on Looney Tunes where the characters were either young versions of the originals or new characters that could be their offspring, a common tactic to apply a new coat of paint to old franchises back then. Semel enlisted famed director Steven Spielberg as a collaborator. Spielberg was getting heavily involved into the animation world at this time, and he had always expressed interest in creating new characters for Warner Brothers. The concept began as a film at first, before changing into a 65-episode TV series for syndication for broader reach, with Spielberg executive producing. To lead Warner Brothers Animation into this new era, the company rehired former WBA general manager Jean McCurdy to oversee production of this new series. She wasted no time in hiring her favorite creators from her former workplace, Hanna-Barbera, people such as Wayne Katz, Alan Burnett, Paul Dini, and, most importantly, Tom Ruegger, who would be the creative brain behind this series. Ruegger had already proven himself to be a capable animator and showrunner at Hanna-Barbera, having developed most of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and gave the kitty-fied spin-off a more parodic and snarkier sense of humor that set it apart from other shows of its ilk. It was exactly what Spielberg and McCurdy wanted for their new show. Full production of the series at Warner Brothers and Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment began on April 13, 1989, and the show, Tiny Toon Adventures, would make its debut to syndicated airways on September 17, 1990.
We're tiny, we're toony, we're all a little loony, and in this cartoony, we're invading your TV.
Hosted by Buster and Babs Bunny, no relation, the show follows the adventures of a mob of young cartoon characters attending Acme Looniversity and being taught by the original Looney Tunes to be the next generation of cartoon characters. The show was more of an episodic variety show. Sometimes the episode would be 3 shorts centered around a theme, while others would be singular adventures with the Toons facing off against some sort of villain or obstacle. This was also one of the first Warner Brothers animation productions to utilize outsourced animation, which resulted in varying quality. On one hand, you had studios like Japan's Tokyo Movie Shinsha, whose animation could almost surpass the original Warner Brothers shorts with how they translated the boards into something greater. On the other hand, you had studios like Kennedy Cartoons, which operated fast and cheap, resulting in repetitive animation that simultaneously moved too much and not enough, to the point that some gags would not land properly. Regardless of varying animation quality, Tiny Toons was successful in making the comedy pioneered by the original Looney Tunes feel fresh and new again.
For 50 points, what are the 2 missing letters? That's absolutely right! The missing letters are I-E!
It operated under tried and true principles of animation Termite Terrace innovated. Its soundtrack utilized a full-scale orchestra like in the old days, recorded on the very same soundstage where Carl W. Stalling conducted his orchestra. It also shined a light on the more obscure parts of the franchise's history, bringing back characters like Foxy, Roxy, Goopy Gear, and even Bosco and Honey, who were given makeovers that were much friendlier to late 20th century sensibilities. It even had some of the old guard of Termite Terrace working on the show. Former director Norm McCabe was on staff as the animation timer for Tiny Toons, and even directed a short for old time's sake. Artist Tom Minton said that Norm could sometimes be indispensable with his institutional knowledge of animation comedy. It was great to have someone on staff with that kind of institutional history and memory, which on occasion the crew would tap when we got stuck. I recall one long afternoon early in the pre-production when everyone was exhausted in terms of the most effective way to end a particular story, and Norm, who had said nothing for 2 hours, piped up in his laconic manner of speech, well, whenever Tex would get stuck, he'd just cut back to a wide angle on the theater, the crowd watching the cartoon, and do a gag about being stuck. While we couldn't do that per se in that story situation, it helped unlock the mental block that everyone had been struggling against. It was almost like having Tex or Bob Clampett or any of the legendary WB directors right there in our midst. When it aired in syndication, Tiny Toons was a success, and would often net higher ratings than the Disney Afternoon block, its main competitor. But even when the show completed its 65-episode order and got 2 new seasons later down the line, Tiny Toons was still a prelude to things to come. McCurdy and the rest of the creative minds at Warner Brothers Animation set more series into motion. 1991 saw the broadcast of the series Tasmania airing that September.
Down to Tasmania, down to Tasmania, come to Tasmania, we mean you!
As the name implies, the show's protagonist is Taz, the Tasmanian Devil. The show was once again developed by Tom Ruegger, and he was able to make Taz a far more flexible character by the situations he put him in. He could fit in a domestic sitcom setting with his shockingly normal family, or in a workplace comedy setting with his job as a hapless put-upon bellhop, or going back to his roots with a chase cartoon setting where Taz can either play the role as the hunter or the hunted. Tasmania was also a success, sometimes matching Tiny Toons in ratings, no doubt helped by Taz's resurgent popularity in the 90s. But both of those shows were small potatoes compared to what came next. The triumph of Tiny Toons impressed Spielberg and McCurdy so much that they awaited what Ruegger had in store next. Spielberg emphasized the need of a marquee name, characters that represented the Warner Brothers animation in both name and spirit. Ruegger would find his inspiration right in front of him. A few days later, I'm walking across the lot and I see the water tower. I had what you call a cartoon epiphany, where it's like, well, wait, there's my marquee. I had already been planning on these 3 characters created years ago who were out of control, and I realized if I can get Warner Brothers to okay the name of these characters as the Warner Brothers and their sister Dot, there's my marquee, and my marquee name.
So just sit back and relax. You'll laugh when you collapse. We're Animaniacs.
Premiering on September 13th, 1993, Animaniacs centered around the Warner brothers, Yakko and Wacko, and their Warner sister, Dot.
But call me Dottie, and you die.
Their story is that they were Looney Tunes characters created in the 30s, but were ultimately locked away in the Warner Tower for being too loony. But that doesn't stop them from breaking loose, vamoosing, and causing general mayhem. The format of the show, like Tiny Toons before it, was a variety show with an ensemble cast of characters. But even with a memorable cast that had Pinky and the Brain, Slappy Squirrel, The Good Feathers, Hip Hippos, Buttons and Mindy, Rita and Runt, Chicken Boo, and Minerva Mink among others, it was the Warners that tied everything together, making the classic cartoon slapstick feel even fresher by combining it with sharp satire, Hollywood parodies, and the occasional gross-out gag for the kids. Animaniacs was popular across demographics. It was the second highest rated show among children when it debuted, second only to the juggernaut that was Power Rangers. It also gained a massive audience of adult fans. The Looney Tunes always maintained a strong adult fan base within nerd circles going all the way back to the 70s, but Animaniacs took that to the next level since their fan base was one of the first new fandoms to take off on this novel little invention called the internet. While the next generation of cartoons occupied network TV, the classic generation's growth on cable television continued. On Nickelodeon, Looney Tunes shorts were consistently bringing in excellent ratings. It aired in both the daytime and as their lead-in program to the more adult-focused Nick at Night block for a few years. It got even bigger in 1992, with Warner Brothers making a big shuffle to their syndication packages and allowing some of the premium Bugs and Daffy shorts to appear on the channel. It also got rid of the black and white shorts starring Bosco. Sorry, Bosco. These packages would shuffle again in 1995 and 1998 respectively. Within these packages, people would also see the airing of the new computer colorizations of the black and white shorts, replacing the low-quality redraws from the 1960s. These were done in collaboration with Warner Brothers and Turner Entertainment. Ted Turner had a bad reputation for his colorization of classic black and white films. Despite his belief that this is what he and the public wanted, he stopped doing it after a few years. But it did lay the groundwork for the computer colorized Looney Tunes of the early 90s. Speaking of, Turner was also making big moves in that period. For Turner, having the Looney Tunes on TNT was just the first step towards something bigger. On October 30th, 1991, Turner Broadcasting System announced that they had signed an agreement to acquire Hanna-Barbera Productions for a cool $320 million, beating out Universal Studios MCA Inc. and Hallmark Cards in a bidding war. At the time, Hanna-Barbera's library consisted of over 3,000 half-hours of television and more than 350 series, specials, and movies. With that purchase, Turner had a king's ransom of cartoons on his hands, enough to make his own channel devoted entirely to them. A network made for cartoons, as it were. Turner selected the then senior vice president of TNT, Betty Cohen, to devise a network that would house all the animated programming he had acquired from Hanna-Barbera, MGM, Fleischer, and Warner Brothers over the years. On February 18, 1992, Turner Broadcasting announced that their new 24/7 cartoon channel would be launching that fall. Its name, Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network was actually a hard sell to most investors. A lot of them believed that, even with a massive library on hand, Turner was going to have a slow start thanks to the growth of cable plateauing and the concern of FCC regulations. They also saw the idea of a 24/7 cartoon channel as pointless, since most kids on weekdays are only watching early morning and afternoon time slots. Putting cartoons in the hours when they are at school or getting ready for bed would just be a waste. To assuage these concerns, a pitch reel was put together to provide the hard data about cartoons. Children watch TV considerably more in prime time when only a select few cartoons are airing, and that adults make up at least half of the cartoon viewing audiences. With Cartoon Network, Turner Broadcasting was hoping to tap into a gold mine.
On average, the audience for cartoons on cable is made up of 46.7% kids. But guess how many adults are watching? 10%? 20%? Not even close. The cartoon audience is a whopping 44.6% adults.
On October 1st, 1992, Cartoon Network hit the airwaves on noon Eastern Standard Time. The launch began with a series of explosions set to the finale of Tchaikovsky's 1814 Overture, followed by a special titled Droopy's Guide to the Cartoon Network. Hosted by the eponymous dog, the special walked people through of what to expect from the channel going forward, scheduling blocks, what shows would be airing, and of course, showing off the stars of the channel. After the special, Cartoon Network truly kicked off with an airing of Friz Freeling's Rhapsody Rabbit. The channel was going to be home to cartoon stars, but it was clear the Looney Tunes were going to tower over the rest. Not just because they had their own 90-minute block of programming called Bugs and Daffy Tonight that aired every weeknight, later renamed to simply Bugs and Daffy, not just because they started an annual marathon of Bugs Bunny shorts that would air next year on June 12th called June Bugs, but because of one simple fact: Warner Brothers had made the Looney Tunes cool. The massive media blitz surrounding Bugs Bunny's 50th at the start of the decade showed the Warner brass that Bugs Bunny, and by extension the rest of the Warner cartoon cast, had a higher profile than many would have imagined. Such momentum needed to be kept going. The Time merger had paid off well for the company. They were one of the top dogs of the entertainment business, competing directly with the likes of Disney. And since Disney had a corporate mascot in the form of Mickey Mouse, Time Warner realized they could have one too. The Looney Tunes had been merchandisable for a long time, and Bugs Bunny was always the head spokesman for that part of the studio. But now, the president of Warner Brothers' merchandising department, Dan Romanelli, was looking at Bugs and the rest of the Looney Tunes as potential brand spokesmen for the entire corporate enterprise. And they would do exactly that in 1992, when Warner Brothers Family Entertainment was established, their logo being the Warner Brothers logo, with a certain someone leaning against it. Around that same time, the bliss for Looney Tunes merchandise was full speed ahead. Kids and adults alike were not safe. The Looney Tunes were on t-shirts, golf shirts, sweatpants, boxer shorts, varsity jackets, wristwatches, ties, cologne, bedding, beach towels, stuffed animals, toys, sporting equipment, posters, stickers, coffee mugs, drinking glasses, flatware, lunchboxes, backpacks, coloring books, picture books, comic books, pogs, postage stamps, Christmas ornaments, golf bags, umbrellas, mud flaps, office supplies, garden decorations, clocks, phones, lamps, cookie jars, salt and pepper shakers, novelty answering machine messages, wedding cake toppers, and video games. Even theme parks weren't safe. When Time Warner completed its acquisition of Six Flags theme parks in 1993, the Looney Tunes presence was all over them, their images being seen on rides, themings, and meet and greet characters. To properly spur this merchandising blitz, Time Warner established the Warner Brothers Studio Store, its first location opening at the Beverly Center in Los Angeles on September 20th, 1991. It was a specialty store devoted to being your one-stop shop for Warner Brothers merch in malls across America. In short, it was Warner's answer to the popular Disney store, positioning itself as a classier alternative.
Our typical sign is customer's exit is, that's all folks. And in this store, it's Thaddeus Venetius Focus, which I'm sure my Latin teacher would kill me for, but a lot of people get the joke.
The Warner Brothers Studio Store had around 120 stores in America at its peak. One of its biggest was its Fifth Avenue store in New York City, which opened in 1993. But even with its success, it was a boring store to be in when you were a kid. You begged your parents to go in there just because you saw the Bugs Bunny standee outside, and when you finally go in, all you see is mostly clothes, all the toys are isolated in the back area and are mostly devoted to stuffed animals, and the only area for kids was that goddamn Marvin the Martian rocket they had, which had nothing inside of it. Like, what was I supposed to do in that? Sorry, lost my train of thought. Adding fuel to the merch train was the continuation of more shorts. 1994 saw the premiere of Chariots of Fur, a brand new Roadrunner short directed by Chuck Jones and animated by his studio. It has the distinction of being the last time Paul Julian provided the voice of the Roadrunner. Future works would use archival recordings. The next year, on August 25th, 1995, the most ambitious Warner Brothers animated short would make its premiere, Carrot Blanca.
What's up, Doc?
An 8-minute short where Bugs Bunny and most of the Looney Tunes stars reenact the Warner Brothers classic film, Casablanca. The parodic homage was unique by short standards, not just for giving the normally voiceless Penelope Pussycat a voice courtesy of Tress MacNeille.
General Pandemonium thinks he knows something about that stolen document.
I stick my cottontail out for no one.
but also for being the only short of this era not produced by Ford and Lennon's internal team nor Chuck Jones Film Productions. It instead was the product of the writing and animation staff from Animaniacs, specifically directors Douglas McCarthy, Spike Brandt, and Tony Cervone, along with then newcomer screenwriter couple Timothy Cahill and Julie McNally. It also marked a change in sound. Jeff Bergman had decided to not pursue voicing the Looney Tunes full-time as he was not committed to relocating to Burbank, California from his hometown of Philadelphia. Replacing him for the near future would instead be an ensemble of voice actors consisted of Greg Burson, Joe Lasky, Maurice LaMarche, Billy West, and Bob Bergen. As the mid-90s rolled around, Time Warner kept expanding as a company, and with expansion comes the desire to cut out the middleman and reap all the benefits. In 1993, the FCC deregulated itself by repealing FinCEN rules in reaction to the growth of cable. These rules prevented large-scale entertainment companies from owning any of the programming they aired in primetime. With these rules repealed, it was open season for companies like Warner Brothers to start their own broadcast networks. Time Warner experimented with a short-lived primetime entertainment network that they did as a joint venture with Chris Craft Industries. But it wasn't until November 2nd of that year when the Warner Brothers division announced the formation of the WB Television Network. Media conglomerate Tribune Company would hold minority interest in the venture and got WB their start by signing away 6 of its 7 independent TV stations at the time. The plan for the WB was to run the channel like any other broadcast network, which meant primetime programming and daytime programming on the weekdays and a 4-hour children's block on Saturday morning, the rest of the airspace being given over to syndication blocks. The WB launched on January 11, 1995, with the debut episode of their soon-to-be hit sitcom The Wayans Brothers. But before that, the launch of the network began with Bugs and Daffy arguing over who will pull the switch to start things up. It then pans over to Chuck Jones drawing the star of his famous One Froggy Evening short, Michigan J. Frog, who does the honor, thus cementing his place as the mascot and spokesfrog of the WB channel.
What's up, Frog?
8 months later, at the start of the fall season, the WB launched their children's programming block, Kids WB. The block was meant to be direct competition for the dominant Fox Kids block, which aired not just on Saturday morning, but also every weekday. And since most of Warner's programming resided on Fox Kids at the time, they were soon pulled and relocated to the new block. Among the former Fox Kids programming, like Animaniacs and the Looney Tunes package shows Merrie Melody starring Bugs Bunny and Friends, which got renamed to That's Warner Brothers before getting renamed again to Bugs and Daffy, they also got new programming. The parody superhero show Freakazoid, the Animaniacs spin-off Pinky and the Brain, and their new Looney Tunes original show, The Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries.
The chase goes on with each new mission, with backdrops aplenty globally. And through it all, they're in contention, Sylvester and Tweety. Mysteries.
The premise of the show had Looney Tunes characters Sylvester and Tweety, their owner Granny, and her pet bulldog Hector travel around the world to solve mysteries. In practice, Granny did most of the mystery solving, while Sylvester tried to, unsuccessfully, eat that darn canary.
Spread out, Tweety. I'm Granny's tow pirate. Tweety Tat World Pizza.
By this point, the Looney Tunes' place in popular culture was not only reaffirmed and locked in, but it was also downright unstoppable. The reach Warner Brothers cartoons cast over the realm of popular culture in the 90s was vast through homages, references, parodies,
If this were a cartoon, the cliff would break off now. I'm thirsty.
and the general topic of conversation.
Did you ever find Bugs Bunny attractive when he'd put on a dress and play a girl bunny?
No. No.
Neither did I. I was just asking.
It was only a matter of time before they reached the high watermark. Advertising creative director Jim Riswold conceived an ambitious Super Bowl advertisement for the sneaker company Nike. The pitch was to have a commercial starring Bugs Bunny playing a pickup basketball game against a group of bullies with his teammate, basketball superstar, and Nike Air Jordan spokesman, Michael Jordan.
What'd you expect? Elmer Fudd?
The ad, titled Hair Jordan, was directed by Joe Pytka and took 6 months and a $1 million budget to make. Warner Brothers was disinclined to loan out Bugs to Nike for fear they would attempt to modernize him. But thanks to Nike allowing the Warner animators to stay true to the spirit of the character, Hair Jordan was the standout commercial for the 1992 Super Bowl. It was so successful, not only did a follow-up ad, Aerospace Jordan, air on next year's Super Bowl broadcast, but the idea began to float around that maybe a movie should be made based around this commercial. The idea was greenlit and pitched across multiple studios, all of whom rejected it, including Warner Brothers themselves. It was even shelved temporarily due to Michael Jordan's short-lived retirement from basketball. It was only after he unretired that Warner Brothers accepted, feeling the time was right for such a movie to coincide with Jordan's big return to the sport. Warner Brothers had also seen the success Disney had been reaping from the feature animation they produced during the 90s, and they wanted in. Production-wise, the film reassembled most of the same crew from the commercials. Joe Pytka would direct, and animation would be provided by the classic animation faction of Warner Brothers Animation, since they were the department who animated the commercials. It didn't stay that way, as the scope of the project became so big that outsourcing became a necessity. They even had their newly formed feature animation crew taken off development of another project, Quest for Camelot, and put onto this film. While Pytka was the director, he ceded leadership of the animation team to two animators, Tony Cervone and Bruce W. Smith. They are largely responsible for the look of the Looney Tunes world in this film, which wound up being a combination of their many creators' styles. We knew who the characters were going to be in the movie. They had evolved over time in the Looney Tunes world. Bugs and Daffy were very domesticated by then, for example. They were much less about just the general broad, wild principles of animation and more in the realm of conservative nature of television. So what Tony and I wanted to do was really go back to those early zany models that Chuck Jones had brought in and that had been nurtured by directors and animators like Tex Avery and Rod Scribner. The plot revolved around Michael Jordan being called up to assist the Looney Tunes in a high-stakes basketball game against the monstrous Monstars so they don't have to become indentured servants to an alien theme park. It was initially titled Up in the Air before receiving the much punchier title of Space Jam. There was a lot of pressure for the animators working on this film. Not only were they given the monumental task of making a Looney Tunes blockbuster starring Michael Jordan, but they were also tasked with animating using cutting-edge digital technology. No more cells. This meant that they would have to have their animation match up with the green screen footage that had been given to them by Pytka, on top of 3D special effects. Because this was a blockbuster film themed around the Looney Tunes, the creators were incentivized to dig deeper into the short's catalog to find characters for cameos. One idea that was floated was, in order to keep the Toon Squad from being a sausage fest, they would bring back the obscure character of Honey Bunny. Honey Bunny only technically appeared in one short, but had always been used in supplementary material if they needed to have Bugs Bunny to promote the straight agenda. The problem was that Honey Bunny's design was too much like Bugs's, which would make things difficult in a fast-paced basketball game where every character's design needed to be readable. So, they reinvented her.
I'd like to try out for the team.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Lola Bunny.
Lola?
Space Jam marked the debut of new Looney Tunes character Lola Bunny. Designed by animator Dan Haskett, Lola was designed as a love interest for Bugs. Flirty, almost femme fatale-ish, but with a tomboyish streak. It was the 90s and our women needed to look hot while being capable and kicking ass.
Try to get by me, dog.
Dog? Don't ever call me doll.
Nice shot.
She still needed to be rescued by Bugs though. Nobody's perfect. Space Jam hit movie theaters on November 15th, 1996, grossing $90.5 million domestically for a grand international total of $250 million, making it the 10th highest grossing film of that year. The film itself has not stood up to modern scrutiny. Among its problems included the flat character writing, Michael Jordan's subpar acting, Bugs Bunny even needing Jordan's help in the first place, and the dated CGI effects that have only grown more embarrassing to look at with time. all while being a depraved monument to Clinton-era capitalism.
Come on, Michael, it's game time. Get your Hanes on, lace up your Nikes, grab your Wheaties and your Gatorade, and we'll pick up a Big Mac on the way to the ballpark.
But you can still see what people enjoyed about this film. It is high-quality, fast-paced Looney Tunes comedy with elements of Jones, Clampett, and Avery mixed throughout. If this is the kind of Looney Tunes film they had to make, it's the best possible execution of the idea. The success of Space Jam could not have come at a better time. Just a month prior, on October 10th, it was announced that Time Warner Entertainment would be merging with Turner Broadcasting Systems, one empire marrying another. Courtesy of Bill Clinton's massive deregulation of the FCC through the Telecommunications Act of 1996, Time Warner was getting a massive cable TV empire under their belts and in the process seeing the long-awaited return of their pre-1950 library of films, which meant, for the first time in 40 years, the entire library of Looney Tunes and Merrie Melody shorts was under one roof again. Pre-1948 shorts could now air on Warner-owned networks. Post-1948 shorts could now air on Turner-owned networks. There were no more limits. The rabbit's reach now stretched towards infinity. Time Warner was now the ultimate media company. Throughout the 90s, they had immense success in the world of film, television, publishing, music, and animation. They ruled the airwaves of both broadcast and cable TV. They made their marks in malls and theme parks across America. And the head of this empire were the Looney Tunes. No longer just cartoon characters or movie stars, but the pantheon of gods and goddesses that overlooked Warner's kingdom with an "ain't I a stinker" look. They were on top of the world. Everybody was happy. Weren't they?
We gotta get new agents. We're getting screwed.
While the Looney Tunes franchise was at its pinnacle of glowing relevance, not everyone could feel that light. Firstly, the march of time continued to usher off the remaining Termite Terrace veterans to their final resting place. In 1989, animator Emery Hawkins succumbed to Alzheimer's on June 1st at age 77. Fellow animator Jerry Chinicki followed afterwards that November at the same age. 1992 saw the deaths of Dark Age director Alex Lovey on February 14th at 78, followed by studio co-founder Rudy Ising on July 18th at 88. Izzy Ellis would go next at age 84 on April 26, 1994. And, most devastatingly, was the loss of Friz Freleng. He would die of natural causes at the UCLA Medical Center on May 26, 1995. He was 89 years old. One of the last remaining links to Termite Terrace's early days. The last man of the small group of Kansas City boys who didn't follow Walt Disney after losing Oswald and instead forged their own path. Friz Freleng had now left behind the world he and many others like him had helped create. The Sylvester and Tweety Mystery series was dedicated in his memory. Of the few who were still around, Chuck Jones remained the biggest figurehead of the artists who made the Looney Tunes, mostly by virtue of being one of the few Termite Terrace alumni still working in the industry. But even that was coming to a close. On November 4th, 1997, From Here to Eternity was released into theaters, the final Looney Tunes short to be directed by Chuck Jones. A few days later, Father of the Bird was released, the final production of Chuck Jones Enterprises, and the final Looney Tunes short to ever use traditional cell animation. It would all be digital from here on out. While Chuck and Friz received their accolades, posthumously in Freleng's case, it was a different story for the younger animators. The classic division of Warner Brothers Animation felt increasingly marginalized throughout the decade. The Warner brass was more focused on the Spielberg-McCurdy division than they were the original studio, since they were mostly relegated to doing commercials and specials. And even the latter was being phased out. The 1992 special, Bugs Bunny's Looney Tunes, never even made it to air. People like Greg Ford used the shorts to vent their frustrations. Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers is all but a commentary positing what the Looney Tunes would look like in the hands of the suits. Flat, inoffensive imitations of the genuine articles that can only spout canned catchphrases.
But now it's all over. It doesn't matter anymore.
The Warner heads were ignorant to such commentary. What didn't get by them was the commentary of Blooper Bunny, a savage parody of Bugs Bunny's 50th birthday celebration that had no subtlety in its jabs at the Powers and their plan to try and turn their tunes into Disney-esque mascots.
Who writes this slop? Ugh. Happy birthday, old chum, old pal, old buddy. The next thing you know, they'll stick me with 3 snot-nosed nephews. I wouldn't put it past them.
The short would end up being shelved until 1997 when the right words got to the right people, and it premiered on Cartoon Network as part of that year's June Bugs Marathon. And while Warner kept funding these shorts, they also appeared to attach them to pictures they had low expectations for. Carrot Blanca wasn't attached to their big summer blockbusters that year, Batman Forever and Free Willy 2, but to the forgotten children's adventure film, The Amazing Panda Adventure. Superior Duck was attached to the wretched Tom Arnold vehicle Carpool, and Pulitzer Prize was attached to Cats Don't Dance, a Turner Pictures production Warner had inherited in the merger and intentionally buried. That is, if they got any theatrical release at all. Chuck Jones' sequel to One Froggy Evening, creatively titled Another Froggy Evening, did not appear to get attached to any particular film and was unceremoniously dumped in January of 1995. Time Warner saw the Looney Tunes less as movie stars and more as icons to shill merchandise. Whether that merchandise was their own or products they had sponsorships with, anything was fair game. It was so widespread during this decade that people began to wonder if Bugs Bunny had become Warner's Mickey Mouse, just another friendly face a cold corporate behemoth can wear as a mask to better launder their reputation to the public. Or maybe it was because they saw no need for the new shorts. After all, by 1997, the classic shorts were airing on 2 broadcast networks and 4 cable networks. As long as that status quo was intact, they could run those shorts forever and still have the Looney Tunes be an omnipresent brand, right? Warning bells began to ring in 1998. While Warner Bros. Celebrated its 75th anniversary, the presence of the classic Looney Tunes and Merrie Melody shorts was beginning to recede. They were removed from the TBS schedule as well as the TNT schedule, with the final cartoon block Bugs Bunny Rah 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 getting the boot that year. More concerning was the removal of Bugs and Daffy from the Kids WB block. That ended up being a canary in the coal mine for the block's comedy shows. The failure of Freakazoid and the ill-advised executive-mandated spin-off Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain had caused the comedy side of Warner Animation to hit the skids. Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries still hung in there, but even if the shorts were temporarily brought back via the Cat and Bunny Warner Rooney Super Looney Big Cartoony Show, a variation of the Cat and Birdie Warner Rooney Pinky Brainy Big Cartoony Show, cartoons of their ilk were about to get fatal competition. Kids WB, adding the already monstrously popular Pokemon anime, changed the game for broadcast animation. Its immediate success caused executives to question why they even need to spend money on their own animators, writers, and orchestra to create a cartoon show when it was much cheaper to import a Japanese anime based on a growing franchise and reap the benefits faster with little cost to them. This spelled doom for the Warner-inspired cartoons, which were already on their way out anyway.
What's the story?
What's the dish? Touch the star and you get one wish.
You get one wish if you touch the star? Where's it at?
Is it way out far?
It could well be, but we just don't know.
We'll soon find out because we're going to go
to the wishing star, to the wishing star. Something weird and so bizarre, it fell to earth from way afar.
They're on their way to the wishing star.
Released on December 21st, 1999, Wacko's Wish is the unofficial finale of the Tom Ruger-helmed cartoon style that had started the decade. And despite its critical and commercial success, it was becoming clear that Warner Bros. Was done producing these types of shows. Earlier that year, on its 11th anniversary on that channel, the classic Looney Tunes were also removed from the Nickelodeon lineup. The dominance of Looney Tunes on TV had now gone from 6 channels to just 3. Warner Bros. Still had the characters be sold as merch and be promotional spokes-tunes, but an evil wind was blowing in the air as the clock ticked towards the first midnight of the 21st century. The new millennium was arriving. The Looney Tunes faced an uncertain future. And unfortunately for them, disaster was right around the corner.
I taught a tag. I did tow a tag.
You can get a cool music CD free if you buy any 3 Looney Tunes products.
A storm precedes a change in season. The storm we have here had its first rumblings beginning in the late 90s. Jerry Levin's tenure may have looked good on paper with the amount of growth Warner Brothers had under him. In reality, it couldn't have been further from the truth. Wall Street shareholders despised him. They saw Levin's continual investments in cable TV as outmoded and foolhardy. To them, he was throwing away money to a lumbering beast of high capital and low return instead of focusing on Warner's true strengths like film and music. Levin's business cunning prevented any internal coups. Anyone who posed a threat to his tenure was swiftly and stealthily ejected or reassigned. Even Ted Turner wasn't safe from being iced out of his own company and placed in a high-ranking but powerless vice chairman role. Levin was not motivated by money nor power, but a sincere, ironclad belief in Time Warner as a company, and that he, and only he, could properly steer it to greatness. It was also speculated that he was immersing himself in work as a means to deal with the grief of the high-profile murder of his youngest son from his first marriage, Jonathan. Warner's focus on cable did pay off in late 1997, 6 months after the Turner deal. Cable had come back into favor with investors, and they were now calling Levin's acquisitions brilliant. This was all due to the co-founder and then CEO of tech giant Microsoft, Bill Gates, making a $1 billion investment into the cable company Comcast, proving once again that stockbrokers and shareholders operate solely on vibes. Gates' investment stemmed from his belief that what defined the internet was cable and vice versa. New cable modems were providing faster internet speeds than dial-up phone lines, which were currently the most common method for surfing the interwebs. To Gates and many others in the tech and business world, the future of the internet depended on cable. This was a problem for Time Warner. Levin and his mentor Steve Ross did envision a future where there would be an internet-like system for people to order packages and pay bills, but they thought it would be done through the TV using a remote control, not a home computer. Time Warner's limited investments into the World Wide Web had not panned out. In 1999, their web portal venture Pathfinder had the plug pulled on it after only 5 years online, making it a $100 million boondoggle. So while Levin going all in on cable was paying off now, it was only a matter of time before shareholders started demanding more internet-focused investments. He needed help. Enter billionaire CEO Steve Case. A Hawaiian-born businessman of non-indigenous descent, Case was a former investment banker who took the online service company Quantum Computer Services and transformed them into American Online, or AOL for short. By emphasizing its use as a community building tool via its focus on forums, chat rooms, and instant messaging, Case helped bring the internet into the homes of millions of everyday people, not just restricting it to being an informational or commercial tool like its competitors CompuServe and Prodigy. But in 1999, after absorbing internet giant Netscape for $4.2 billion and subsequently making AOL one of the most valuable businesses on the market, Case feared that his ambitions had made his company a target. Competition in the online space, led by scrappy upstarts like Yahoo, Microsoft, and Google, was growing, and they were hungry to take the king's crown. Case, being a realist, also knew that AOL stock could not rise forever. In fact, he was duly aware of the ugly truth that his stock, along with every other internet company's stock, was artificially inflated and overpriced due to initial investor mania. If he wanted AOL to stay on top, he would need to attach himself to an older, more secure company to weather the treacherous waters ahead. And that's what led to Case knocking on Levin's and Time Warner's door. He came to this decision, ironically, while on a trip to Beijing, China to attend celebrations for his 50th anniversary of communist rule. The two men sat down to dinner at Manhattan's Riga Royal Hotel on November 1st, 1999, and soon found that they had similar high-minded ambitions about their own companies. It also helped that, like with the Time Warner merger a decade ago, the two companies would benefit greatly from such a union. For Time Warner, it would allow them greater penetration into the growing world of digital media and publishing, and for AOL, it would allow them access to Warner's vast cable infrastructure to better suit the growing consumer need for higher bandwidth. After a few weeks of negotiating, it happened. On Friday, January 7th, at the end of the first work week of the new millennium, Levin made the announcement that the deal was going through. Time Warner would be merging with America Online. And while Steve Case would, on paper, get 55% of the company, his role going forward would mostly be ceremonial. Jerry Levin was still captain of this ship. When the news broke to the public 3 days later, it would be announced as the largest merger ever at $183 billion, and the most significant business move done by an internet company to date. To many, it represented the peak of the dot-com boom. Joint paperwork would be filed on February 11th, and the Federal Trade Commission gave final approval the next year on January 11th. So what does this all have to do with the Looney Tunes? Lots, actually. At the turn of the millennium, the Looney Tunes' once pervasive presence over television airways continued to recede. On Kids WB, the Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries aired its last batch of episodes on February 5th, 2000, and the Big Cartoony Show was dropped from its lineup completely on August 31st as part of a soft rebranding of the block to focus exclusively on action cartoons and anime. The following Saturday, September 2nd, would also be the final time the Bugs Bunny Show would air on ABC, concluding its 40-year run on broadcast TV. From this point onward, Cartoon Network and its newly christened sister channel, Boomerang, would be the only place that would air the classic Looney Tunes shorts. This could be read as a marginalization of the Looney Tunes brand, shrinking their once dominant reach across television. But even then, Cartoon Network was a very accommodating place for the shorts. Even when the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons were quietly shuffled off to Boomerang in favor of Cartoon Network's growing slate of original programming and anime imports, there was always space given to the Looney Tunes. Not just through programming blocks like Bugs and Daffy and Acme Hour, but also shows that aimed to educate viewers on the people who made the shorts. Shows like Toonheads, The Tex Avery Show, The Bob Clampett Show, and The Chuck Jones Show. Warner Brothers also kept greenlighting new Looney Tunes projects. September 12, 2000 saw the release of the first direct-to-video Looney Tunes movie, Tweety's High-Flying Adventure, a Sylvester and Tweety tinged riff on Around the World in 80 Days.
Look, there's Times Square.
It looks like the center of the universe.
You might say that.
They also prepared for the incoming AOL merger by expanding the Toons' internet presence. They commissioned a fully 3D Marvin the Martian short for their original shorts website, entertaindom.com.
Oh, I know you're probably eager to learn of my latest proposal for your planet's destruction, but you'll just have to wait. You see, even a Martian needs a break every once in a while.
They also rode the Flash animation revolution by releasing Looney Tunes webtoons that were exclusive to the Looney Tunes official website. While an honest attempt was made to maintain the humor of the original shorts, the webtoons still were affected by the technological limitations of the time. But those were small potatoes compared to Warner's biggest project involving the Looney Tunes, a project that was years in the making.
Hey there, everybody, it's a Looneyful day to play the Baby Looney Tunes way.
Baby Looney Tunes had its roots in a set of merchandise called Looney Tunes Lovables. Basically, baby versions of the tunes that would be used for products meant for babies and toddlers, such as lullaby tapes and picture books. A cartoon was soon afterwards announced, first under the name Little Looney Critters, before changing it to the more self-evident Baby Looney Tunes. A trial run for the franchise's branding was the Spike Brandt-directed short Little Go Beep. Released on April 7, 2000, the short was the first Looney Tunes short to be produced in digital ink and paint, as well as Richard Stone's final music collaboration before he succumbed to pancreatic cancer in 2001. The basic conceit was just your typical Roadrunner short, but with the Coyote and Roadrunner as cute babies. It was originally made to be part of a Baby Looney Tunes direct-to-video anthology film that would also have shorts involving baby Bugs and baby Sylvester and Tweety. Warner Brothers Consumer Products, though, shelved the project. They had other ideas for the franchise within a franchise. The actual Baby Looney Tunes show premiered on September 16, 2002, airing first in syndication on WB affiliates before moving on to Cartoon Network, where it would become their unofficial preschooler programming, which was exactly what it was: calm and offensive programming designed to teach little children lessons like sharing and manners, made for toddlers as well as children and teenagers stuck at home sick from school.
Well, first things first. Has anyone seen my diaper?
It should also be noted that this was the first official Looney Tunes product to introduce Lola Bunny as a full-fledged character outside of Space Jam. And that's not even going into the various comics, video games, and other merchandise Warner was greenlighting, as well as the Toons continuing their presence on commercials shilling for products for other corporations. Plus, the emergent global economy of the late 20th century allowed the Toons to be broadcast across the globe at a faster rate than ever before, cementing them as a global property.
La peinture du séjour!
Astral chambre et séjour. C'est fait pour ça?
Yes, I do makase ta.
日本中いつでもどこでも情報を逃さない。
今日は疲れたな。東芝の携帯電話。
Sure, the Looney Tunes had lost dominance over American TV, but their parent company were still putting in the effort to keep them in the public eye. Weren't they? The 90s merchandising blitzkrieg of the Looney Tunes was, no doubt, a success. Space Jam was the peak of that era, and the box office numbers don't lie there. But that success hinged on the classic Looney Tunes shorts' unyielding presence on television. And come the turn of the 21st century, Warner Brothers' internal attitude towards those shorts may have started to cool. The shorts encompassed 40 years worth of material ending in the year 1969, and with time ever lurching forwards, some parts of those shorts looked more and more old-fashioned with each pressing day, and they would end up being seen as a poor reflection on Warner Brothers. When Cartoon Network had the entirety of the Warner Brothers Shorts library under their roof, it was announced that the 2001 iteration of the traditional June Bugs Marathon would be 49 hours consisting of all Bugs Bunny shorts, from Porky's Hare Hunt to From Hare to Eternity. But truthfully, not all of the Bugs Bunny shorts were aired. 12 Bugs Bunny shorts were removed from the marathon and, unofficially, from rotation on Cartoon Network. They were Hiawatha's Rabbit Hunt, All This Rabbit Stew, Any Bonds Today, What's Cookin' Doc, Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips, Air Meets Hair, A Feather in His Hair, Mississippi Hair, Frigid Hair, Which is Which, Bushy Hair, and Horse Hair. Most of these shorts were pulled because they relied a lot on dated and offensive racial stereotypes for their gags, particularly of indigenous peoples, while some were removed because they were made as clear World War II propaganda and had humor that was dated in another way, but also the same way.
What up, Honorable Doc?
It was originally planned that these would air as part of a late night Toonheads episode with extra context given to their removal from the daytime hours, but that episode was pulled at the last minute. The episode's title would end up being the unofficial name of these shorts, The 12 Missing Hairs. The reaction to these omissions were mixed. From the animation community, the reaction was outrage over censorship and what they considered rewriting history. Animation historian Jerry Beck stated that these cartoons are important historical documents, and they're being terribly abused. Adults should be able to see this work. Chuck Jones was also critical of the network's decision, stating that networks were lousy editors and lousy child psychologists. Others defended this decision by saying that the Looney Tunes are meant to entertain first and foremost, and to have those negative stereotypes out there in the ether does a disservice to both them and the audience.
1 little, 2 little, 3 little engines. 4 little, 5 little, 6 little engines. Uh-oh, sorry, that one was a half-breed.
And those were the only properly publicized shorts that were removed. Other non-Bugs Bunny shorts that relied on negative racial stereotypes, dated World War II propaganda, or a combination of both found themselves either quietly removed from the rotation or relegated to the late night hours, sometimes as part of Toonhead specials that actually aired. Warner Brothers, in this endeavor, were prone to overcorrecting though. Even before Cartoon Network netted the exclusivity deal, one of the big mandates from Warner Brothers was to cease the airing of any and all Speedy Gonzales cartoons, believing that the behavior of he and his fellow mice in the shorts embodied poor ethnic stereotypes of Mexican people and their language, not helped that they were all voiced by a Jewish man. The pushback to this decision ended up being far more effective. Despite the controversy, Speedy Gonzales was a very popular character in Latin America and the American Latino communities, with his shorts being staples of Mexican television for years. Thanks to fan campaigns and the backing of the League of United Latin American Citizens, Speedy Gonzales' shorts returned to air sometime around 2002. But moments like this told us something. Warner Brothers was beginning to fall out of love with the Looney Tunes. It may have been an institution, but age was now causing it to feel like an albatross around their necks. For the first time in a long time, the Looney Tunes' place at Warner Brothers was now more precarious than ever, so long as there weren't any huge shakeups within the company. So about that AOL-time Warner merger. It turns out that it went through at the very worst time. On Friday, March 10th, 2000, almost a month after the merger's paperwork was filed, the Nasdaq Composite Stock Market Index peaked at 5,048.62. 3 days later, news that Japan was entering another recession triggered a global sell-off. These events are known to be the peak and subsequent bursting of the dot-com bubble. The sell-off hit technology stocks hard. eBay and Yahoo had to scuttle plans for a merger, which hit both of their stocks even harder. Microsoft losing a highly publicized antitrust case also caused more people to rethink investing in internet companies. By November 9th, around the time the much ballyhooed Pets.com went out of business, most internet stocks had declined in value by 75%. By the time the AOL-Time Warner merger was finalized on January 2001, $200 billion in shareholder value for internet companies had been destroyed. The value of AOL stock had gone from $226 billion to around $20 billion.
In that short time, AOL Time Warner has lost nearly $200 billion of its shareholders' money. When this building, the company's new headquarters, is completed, few believe the sign above its entrance will still include the letters AOL.
The ink on the finalized paperwork hadn't even dried, and already commentators were calling it the worst deal of the 21st century. And Gerald Levin, the public face of the merger, was branded one of the worst American CEOs of all time. It was even worse internally. Like with all the mergers, the AOL-Time Warner merger brought with it waves upon waves of layoffs, with 2,000 jobs lost on January 2001, followed by 1,700 that August, and 2,400 next March. There were also massive culture clashes with how the business was run, which included, but not limited to, it would get so bad that, by the fall of 2001, an embittered Ted Turner, who had been forced out of CNN in a boardroom coup that spring, verbally castigated Gerald Levin in a meeting, saying that he was single-handedly destroying the company. Nobody rose to Levin's defense. And then 9/11 happened, and, well, would you believe things got worse? Not only did the World Trade Center attacks demolish the lavish Warner Brothers studio store that was located in its underground mall, but the attacks worsened an already steep recession that the United States was currently going through, which, in turn, worsened AOL-Time Warner's already bleak economic fortunes. It would soon come to light that AOL had mostly been doing a series of parlor tricks to investors to keep up the appearances that they were still a massively profitable company, shifting its money from one part of its ledger to another, converting unpaid legal settlements into ad revenue, etc. Combined with the pie-in-the-sky tech promises that AOL kept giving in the face of mass decline, it wasn't long before the Time Warner brass began to feel like they were sold a bill of goods. The AOL merger was a bust, and blame fell squarely on Gerald Levin's shoulders. He was the one that got Time Warner into this mess, especially once it was revealed that he had neglected to put a collar on the merger that would have protected Time Warner from a drop in stock price of its buyer, AOL. If he had done so, the deal would have been renegotiated with Time Warner holding all the cards. But because Levin wanted to show that he believed in this merger come hell or high water, no collar was ever put into play, and that's what signed his death warrant. After Steve Case attempted a boardroom coup to save face, Gerald Levin resigned in disgrace on December 5th, 2001. After that, Levin largely disappeared from the public eye until his death on March 13th, 2024 from Parkinson's at age 84. To replace Levin, people assumed his replacement would be then current COO Bob Pittman. Former creator of MTV turned CEO of AOL Networks, he was Levin's biggest cheerleader to the point that it seemed like he was his heir apparent. The position instead went to co-COO Rich Parsons. By the start of 2002, the combination of the dot-com crash and AOL sticking to dial-up services over the new broadband infrastructure had rendered half of the newly merged company irrelevant in the face of other internet giants that were able to weather the storm. This prompted investors to sell off their AOL-Time Warner stocks in droves if they hadn't already. Amid this chaos and power struggle, AOL-Time Warner often found themselves cutting costs to pay for the merger. One way was through shuttering Warner Brothers studio store locations, including their large-scale flagship Fifth Avenue store. By the end of December 31st, 2001, all store locations in America were shut down. In other words, 9/11 probably ended up saving the company a few extra dollars in liquidation costs. This was only a symptom of a bigger problem. The closure of the Warner Brothers Studio store was part of a greater cost-saving initiative to scale back on branded merchandising costs. This included a scaling back of Looney Tunes merch. One of the few bright spots in this tumultuous time for aol-time Warner was that Warner Brothers landed a series of huge box office blockbuster hits at the movies. Franchises like The Matrix and Harry Potter not only were critical and commercial successes, but also offered greater merchandising potential. They no longer needed to rely on merchandising reiterations of their old classics when they had hot new properties waiting in the wings. Outside the world of business, the legacy of the Looney Tunes was not doing much better. Time, like always, was making sure of that. It was the dawn of the 21st century, and there were still surviving Termite Terrace veterans around to tell their stories. But not for long. Director Art Davis would die peacefully at his home on May 9, 2000 at age 94. Background artist and animator Maurice Noble would follow him a year later on May 18, 2001, 17 days after his 90th birthday. At the time, he was still working in the animation industry as a consultant. And then, there was Chuck. Chuck Jones had seen a lot throughout his lifetime, watching cartoons go from silent short subjects into the colossus of the industry it blossomed into. Because of his general longevity, making the right Hollywood connections, and the willingness to always give interviews, Chuck Jones had become the de facto authority on all things related to Looney Tunes and non-Disney Western animation in general. If there was something stirring within the animation world, Jones would always be there to answer. If there was any inquisitive journalist or Hollywood historian willing to shed light on Warner's cartoon history, Jones was always there to pick up the phone. He attended industry awards ceremonies and red carpet galas. He founded his nonprofit Chuck Jones Center for Creativity. He hadn't even fully retired from the animation industry, releasing a series of animated flash shorts for the Warner Brothers website called Timberwolf in 2001.
I do believe that squirrel's plumb loco, screwy in the head, a few logs shy of a cabin, or to put it simply, that boy is nuts.
Chuck Jones stood the tallest among the creative class of his generation, and thanks to him ingratiating himself as their elder spokesman, his interpretations of the Looney Tunes cast had practically become their default personalities. He was also standing mostly alone. The problem with outliving most of your generation of animators is that you also outlive most of your friends and compatriots. Plus, Jones's path to longevity was long and fraught. He had to endure the untimely death of his first wife Dorothy in 1978, as well as receiving a pacemaker, hip and ankle replacements, and surviving a serious skin cancer scare. Chuck Jones had lived a long life and the consequences that came with that. But even then, the curtain must still fall at the end. On February 22, 2002, at his home in Corona del Mar in Newport Beach, California, Chuck Jones died of congestive heart failure. He was 89 years old. Cartoon Network would air a 20-second tribute to him dedicated to his memory, to the man who helped build the cartoons that defined the channel. Jones wasn't the final Looney Tunes director to pass on from this world though. Norm McCabe and Rudy LaRiva would beat him by a few years in 2006 and 2010 respectively, both at the ages of 94. Chuck Jones's death may have been the end of something, but it also marked a new beginning. Or at least that was the plan. Going into the new millennium, Warner Brothers had a three-pronged approach to inject new life into the Looney Tunes brand. The first prong was a new Cartoon Network show, Duck Dodgers, a comic sci-fi show based off the original Duck Dodgers short with Daffy and Porky reprising their roles as both the titular character and his eager young space cadets.
Ha! Danger is my middle name. I thought your middle name was Edgar.
I was speaking metaphorically.
Oh yeah, metaphorically.
Developed and directed by Spike Brandt and Tony Cervone, the pitch of the show had been kicked around since 1997. The conceit of the show was expanding the world of the Duck Dodgers shorts and adapting other Looney Tunes characters to fit the world. They could turn Elmer Fudd into an assimilating alien parasite, or Wile E. Coyote into an alien bounty hunter. At the same time, new cast members were added like Marvin the Martian Superior, the beautiful Queen Tyranny, voiced by Tia Carrere.
Oh, Commander, you're wonderful. Mwah.
For a show that aired on what was ostensibly a kids' network, the humor felt very cutting edge. The sharp-biting humor is the result of Brent Cervone utilizing concepts for the show they had drawn up for a primetime Daffy Duck show that never saw the light of day. At the same time, it largely pulled off what Warner Brothers set out to do. It modernized the Looney Tunes humor without sacrificing their brand of looniness. Most importantly, it allowed Davy to show off his strength as a comedic lead without him needing to act as a foil to a certain gray rabbit.
A perfect specimen from nature's bounty. That'll make for a great start. That's weird. All of a sudden I seem shorter. Funny. Wonder why that is.
In contrast, there was the second prong of attack. Warner Brothers commissioned a brand new slate of theatrical shorts that would be rolled out into theaters. These shorts would be produced and headed up by television writer Larry Doyle, and his reign was flawed from the start thanks to his first decree. It would only be staffed by people who had never worked on a Looney Tunes project before. In theory, this did seem like a good idea. Instead of drawing from the established talent pool at Warner Brothers, Doyle used his vast connections in TV to get writers from shows like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and King of the Hill. People like Rich Moore, Dan Povenmire, John Vitti, and Bill Kopp, among others. Talented creators and well poised to be the new blood injected into this long-in-the-tooth franchise. In practice, though, the Larry Doyle shorts just weren't funny. The animation felt flat and bland, they were usually built on gimmicky premises like Wile E. Coyote using a spellbook to catch the Roadrunner, and the overall rhythm of the cartoons was always inconsistent. The timing either lingered on a joke too long or refused to let a gag sit before moving on to the next. The jokes themselves also eschewed the classic slapstick in favor of leaning more into the 90s style cartoon violence and gross out humor.
From there, the food makes a lengthy journey through the small intestine, then onto the large intestine, the colon, and finally what remains is eliminated as waste.
Are you okay, Pooty Tat? You look pooped.
The writers were trying to bend the tunes more to their comfort zones, and it feels off. While the Looney Tunes cast were flexible, they did have limits to what they can and can't do. Turning Porky Pig into a bumbling sitcom dad doesn't really work, it turns out.
Young little lady, you're coming home with me. Okay.
Production was also hindered by Doyle's own asshole behavior, forcing veteran voice actors like Bob Bergen to switch up the methods they were used to in order to, in his own words, sound more like Mel Blanc. The actors were also not as comfortable with the raunchy humor Doyle and his team kept trying to coax out of them, and let them know to no avail. Apocryphally, these problems were not assisted by Doyle spending company time trolling the Toon Zone forums and getting into internet fights with cartoon fans. But whatever. It, along with Duck Dodgers, were mere auxiliary points to the mighty spear of the third and final point of attack. The success of and lucrative merchandise sales brought on by Space Jam years ago prompted Warner Brothers to spearhead ideas for a sequel. Development on Space Jam 2 began immediately after the first. It would basically be a repeat of its predecessor, with Michael Jordan and the Toons playing a basketball game against another alien villain called Berserko. Joe Pytka would return as director, and Tony Cervone and Spike Brandt as animation directors. However, Michael Jordan had gone back to basketball at this point, so he is unavailable indefinitely. The project was shelved, and most of the team went over to the studio's next project, a remake of The Incredible Mr. Limpet starring Jim Carrey, which was, thankfully, also shelved. The Space Jam sequel idea was not dead though. Warner decided that it needed to recenter development around new ideas with related and more available celebrities that could be attached. Ideas like Race Jam starring NASCAR celebrity Jeff Gordon, Spy Jam starring Warner's big action star at the time, Jackie Chan, or an untitled golfing Space Jam starring Tiger Woods. All these projects would end up cancelled before any significant work was put in towards them. Eventually, one idea was settled on. All the producers needed now was a director. Joe Dante was the one they had in mind. Dante, famed for his work in the 80s and 90s that combined humor with high-concept plots, had been trying to get Warner Brothers to greenlight a biopic about Termite Terrace in the 1930s for years. That film ended up getting shelved in favor of Space Jam. The tipping point came with the death of Chuck Jones. Jones had been a close friend of Dante's. With Warner Brothers offering him a chance to make a Looney Tunes feature film, he now had the best chance to pay tribute to a late mentor and a friend. Dante would sign on to the project, now named Looney Tunes, back in action.
And be very, very thankful that Bugs and all of his friends are in Looney Tunes Back in Action. Starts November 14th, rated PG.
Formally announced in Variety on January 10, 2002, the story involves Bugs and Daffy getting entangled with an evil plot formed by the president of the Acme Corporation, played by Steve Martin, and having to put a stop to it, all while being accompanied by an aspiring stuntman, played by Brendan Fraser, and a Warner Brothers executive, played by a fresh off Dharma and Greg, Jenna Elfman. The story was put together by screenwriter duo John Requa and Glenn Ficarra, fresh off their breakout hit Cats and Dogs, and the screenplay was written by the aforementioned Larry Doyle. But Joe Dante planned to have the true heart of the movie be the comical gags. To this end, he recruited Disney animator Eric Goldberg to act as animation director. Despite his occupation, Goldberg was a massive Looney Tunes fanboy, to the point that he moonlighted on the Chuck Jones short Superior Duck while he was in the middle of directing the movie Pocahontas. His knowledge of the Looney Tunes was so vast that he was originally going to be a consultant, but seeing that he and Dante mostly agreed about what the characters should be and do in the film, he got promoted to animation director. For Goldberg, he wanted to define the every Bugs and every Daffy for this film, craft versions of the characters that would embody every era of their long history. Jim Henson Company puppeteer Bruce Lanoil would provide the puppets for the cast to act against, and the score would be written by industry veteran Jerry Goldsmith, the last film score he would ever compose, as he would pass away 8 months following the film's release. To Joe Dante, this film was going to be his chance to make the kind of big-budget Looney Tunes blockbuster that his friend Chuck Jones would be proud of. They weren't going to be mascots in a big-budget commercial. They were going to be movie stars once more, provided that the Warner executives did not meddle with the production. The Warner executives meddled with the production almost immediately, constantly demanding reshoots, retakes, and the shuffling around of scenes. Set pieces that were originally meant for the middle became the climax, and set pieces that were originally meant for the climax became inserted into the middle. The executives also hired a staggering 25 gag writers for Punch-Up, something that's incredibly hard to do when the gags rely a lot on the visuals and the animation is already completed and in the can. In Dante's words, the movie had a different beginning, middle, and ending than the one they had started out with. This is all being done with the added pressure of this being Warner Brothers Feature Animation's last shot. After buying Turner's feature animation studio, Warner had hoped to use the extra staff and studio space to compete with Disney. Unfortunately, their output of Quest for Camelot, The Iron Giant, and Osmosis Jones all ended up being costly, high-profile bombs. The studio was practically dead in the water by the time Back in Action entered production. Eric Goldberg had to reassemble an animation team from scratch since so little people were actually working in the building. Looney Tunes Back in Action was originally slated to be a summer blockbuster, but got pushed down to the holiday season, making its red carpet premiere on November 9, 2003, before receiving its wide release on the 14th. At long last, the labors of Dante and Goldberg would be seen by the world. A blockbuster movie that stayed true to the spirits of the original Looney Tunes and made the characters stars of the silver screen once again. The film bombed hard. Looney Tunes Back in Action opened at number 5 on the weekend box office, grossing a domestic total of $9,317,371. It was beaten out by the premiere of 20th Century Fox's Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, and the holdovers of New Line Cinema's Elf and Disney's Brother Bear locking down the family demographic. It also had Warner Brothers' own Matrix Revolutions completely cannibalizing its earnings. It fared even worse next week when its gross dropped a whopping 54%, getting slaughtered by, of all things, Universal's The Cat in the Hat. Critically, reception was mixed. Some critics, like Roger Ebert, praised the film, saying that it matched the comedy of the original shorts in a worthy tribute to the original creators. Others were far more critical, calling the plot nonsensical and all over the place, and that Steve Martin was clearly given too long of a leash in how he interpreted his character.
You knew it was me, did you? Well, you're wrong, because I'm not me. I'm actually... Ugh. Oh, I can't reach over the hat, you know. I'd rehearsed back at Acme, but I never wore the hat.
The film does have Dante's and Goldberg's fingerprints all over it, and their energy does shine through in a movie that's clearly being suffocated by studio mandates. Even then, the studio interference does make this film messier than it needed to be, and Fraser and Elfman's presence only end up weighing the movie down. Plus, the film was not exactly putting its best foot forward by acknowledging that the brand was stagnating. Somewhere along Back in Action's production, Warner Brothers lost complete faith in the Looney Tunes. The movie was given a limited ad campaign and sent out in the middle of the packed holiday box office. So when they got the earnings report back, it confirmed what they figured all along. The Looney Tunes' time as a mainstream cultural force was over.
Sell all my Warner Brothers stock! I got an inside tip that Bugs Bunny's about to die!
Any plans for revitalizing the Looney Tunes brand were now scuttled. Back in Action led to a sorry $68.5 million total gross against an $80 million budget. Joe Dante, calling the project the longest year and a half of his life, decided to take a hiatus from directing movies and return to television. As of this video, he has not directed a feature film since. The Larry Doyle shorts fared worse, with the plug being pulled with only 7 shorts completed, meaning we missed out on shorts like Daffy Duck getting eaten by Santa's elves and a chase cartoon about Granny literally outrunning the Reaper. Huge loss there, I know. The shorts never got their planned theatrical releases and were instead released as part of various DVD extras, or in the case of the short Wizard of Ow, premiering on Walmart display TVs. The Looney Tunes were, once again, relegated to television only, and even then, they weren't going to be there long. As Cartoon Network produced and acquired more programming, the classic Looney Tunes presence on the network slowly began to shrink. The expansion of the adult programming block, Adult Swim, to 5 nights a week on January 12, 2003, caused the classic shorts to lose most of their late night blocks. By the time Back in Action was released, the Acme Hour block had been retired that spring, and most Looney Tunes airings had been relegated to Sunday morning hours. When Cartoon Network rebranded to their much-praised City era, the Looney Tunes were barely in the branding, only buoyed by the presence of Duck Dodgers and reruns of the Sylvester Tweety Mysteries. The Bugs and Daffy show had been dropped from the schedule earlier that spring, so the few classic shorts that did air did so without any wraparounds. Come October 3rd, the classic Looney Tunes were completely dropped from Cartoon Network's schedule, full stop. Part of the blame is on the blowback from the failure of Back in Action, but this was also a business decision by the network. It turns out the reason why Looney Tunes and other classic cartoons were slowly phased out of the network's programming was because Cartoon Network did not get a cut of merchandising from them. The only exceptions were Scooby-Doo and Tom and Jerry, which explains why those cartoons not only stuck around on the channel, but remained integrated with its branding. The modern cartoons were also not safe. Reruns of Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, and Pinky and the Brain made it over to Nickelodeon at the start of the decade, but were gone by 2005. Sylvester and Tweety Mystery reruns were also dropped from Cartoon Network that same year. And then there's Duck Dodgers. While it was popular enough to nab a second season, when that season premiered on August 14, 2004, it was part of a Saturday afternoon marathon that burned off half the season. The other half would not air until January of next year. When its third season aired as part of the 2005 Friday night block, it got cancelled halfway through its run and dropped from reruns later that year. The remaining unaired episodes of the final season would be burned off on Boomerang 5 months later in September. By the summer of 2005, the only Looney Tunes programming to be seen on Cartoon Network were Duck Dodgers reruns airing at 12:30 a.m. on Saturdays, and Baby Looney Tunes, who were only there to lay the foundation for Cartoon Network's failed Nick Jr. ripoff, Tickle You. As for classic shorts, internally it was decided that they didn't need to be on TV anymore. The lead up to Back in Action also gave rise to the Golden Collection DVDs, which had a curated list of shorts from all eras of the studio, remastered and uncut. There was even a warning at the start of every one of these DVDs stating the decision to leave them uncut, acknowledging the dated prejudices the original shorts carried at the time.
And these jokes were wrong then and they are wrong today. But removing these inexcusable images and jokes from this collection would be the same as saying they never existed. So they are presented here to accurately reflect a part of our history that cannot and should not be ignored.
These DVDs allowed the original shorts to live on in another and arguably superior form, but it also spelled out a bitter truth. The Looney Tunes were now a niche product, the realm of film and cartoon nerds willing to slam down $60 on a box set for a chance to rewatch their favorite Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck shorts they grew up with. And if the classic shorts aired on TV again, it was on Turner Classic Movies, not anywhere kids and families were watching. If Bugs Bunny and company had any chance of returning to the airwaves, they would have to drop anything and everything that would remind people of the classic shorts. Unfortunately, they put that theory into practice. In the year 2772, a meteor strikes the city planet of Acmetropolis, knocking it completely off its original axis. The planet is not destroyed, but the impact releases waves of supernatural energies that completely rewrite people's DNA codes. Among the affected are 6 teenagers with attitude, teenagers who happen to be descendants of the original Looney Tunes. Under the command of a mysterious woman named Zadavia, these 6 teens form a crime-fighting team of superheroes. They are Ace Bunny, Lexi Bunny, Danger Duck, Rev Runner, Techie Coyote, and Slam Tasmania. They are the Lunatics, and I am 100% not making any of this up.
I can keep this up all day.
Lunatics Unleashed was brought into this world through a pitch by SWAT Kats creators Yvonne and Christian Tremblay. Apparently, both the president of Warner Brothers Animation, Sander Schwartz, and Kids WB president, David Gianolari, adored the pitch, saying that it was a great way to, quote, take the classic Looney Tunes franchise that has been huge with audiences for decades and bring it into the new millennium.
These characters are new, they're fresh, and they're intended to extend the franchise and to stand on their own.
Fans, however, did not see it that way. When a teaser revealed the eponymous Lunatics designs in February 2005, the general public was less than receptive, with one woman stating the obvious, if they're gonna make Bugs Bunny so different, why not just come up with a new character?
Fuck no, bitch! That is fucking old and retarded! You wanna know what's up, Doc? My cock up your ass!
There was even a petition started by 11-year-old cartoon fan Thomas Adams called Save Our Looney Tunes, to let Warner Brothers know that Looney Tunes fans were not happy with these designs. The petition got 85,000 signatures, enough that Warner Brothers did listen and revised the character designs to be less edgy and changed the name from The Lunatics to its current title. Lunatics Unleashed premiered on the Kids WB on September 17, 2005. Looking at it today, it's a strange beast. While the animation and voice acting were good enough and it had some inspired choices for using other Looney Tunes descendants as a rogues gallery, Lunatics Unleashed had a massive case of identity crisis, wanting to take itself seriously as an action show, but afraid to stray far from its roots as part of the Looney Tunes franchise. This causes the action cartoon tenets like stakes and character development not really jiving with the series. Why do we have to take a certain threat seriously when it was introduced earlier as a punchline to a gag?
Look, Mommy, I'm on TV.
As such, Lunatics Unleashed only stands as an inferior product compared to its action contemporaries that had much stronger identities. Shockingly though, Lunatics Unleashed was a hit. It ranked #1 in ratings for the entire Saturday morning block. Warner Brothers even called it their breakout hit that year. Considering what was airing alongside it, I believe it. A second season was put into production to be released in the fall of 2006, just in time for another massive rebranding, this time for its home channel. Warner Brothers and CBS Corporation announced on January 24, 2006 that they would shut down both the UPN and WB networks and launch a brand new joint broadcast network called the CW Network. The WB would air its final night of programming on September 17th that year. Lunatics' second season aired on the Kids WB block, which was still intact 6 days later. But by then, it barely mattered. The ugly truth was that Saturday morning cartoons as a format was dying. It had been for a long time. And while the anime boom had kept it alive, those programs were already heading elsewhere. New episodes of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were no longer airing on Kids WB. They were airing on Cartoon Network. And whatever success the Lunatics had, it was not gonna last.
Oh dear.
Lunatics Unleashed aired its second season finale on May 5th, 2007. It would not be renewed for a third. No reruns were aired on either Kids WB or Cartoon Network. On October 2nd, 2007, the CW announced that it would cancel the Kids WB block, citing competition from cable TV. Warner Brothers would now sell the useless broadcast real estate to a woebegone 4Kids Entertainment in 2008. The purges did not stop there. The day after Lunatics Unleashed aired its last, Boomerang completely dropped the classic Looney Tunes from its schedule, as did Turn Classic Movies on March 5th, 2007. On October 21st, 2008, the final volume of the Looney Tunes Golden Collection was released. By the end of the second W. Bush administration, Warner Brothers had successfully closed off access to any Looney Tunes content, old and new alike. The only Looney Tunes media airing with any regularity was the 2006 direct-to-video Christmas special Bah Humduck and Baby Looney Tunes. It was a dark time to be a Looney Tunes fan. After a decade of seemingly endless dominance in the public eyes, it all came crashing down in an instant through bad business decisions and cultural sea changes. With the 2010s on the horizon, the dim embers of hope that flickered in the hearts of cartoon fans everywhere was the hope that maybe, just maybe, the pendulum would swing back.
You're still despicable.
Could switching to Geico really save you 15% or more on car insurance? Would Foghorn Leghorn make a really bad book narrator?
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And by worst, I'm talking as bad, I say as bad as my Aunt Jenny's corn pudding. That stuff will sink you like a stone.
Okay, that was
you getting all this in there, son? I just added that last part. It's called ad-libbing. Anyway, I say it was the
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
The Looney Tunes' absence from television was surprisingly not that long. On January 1st, 2009, the Looney Tunes made a temporary return to airwaves as part of a New Year's marathon on Cartoon Network. Later that November, on the 15th, the Looney Tunes aired another marathon on Cartoon Network before returning to regular rotation. It was during the daytime hours where most kids were at school, but it was something. The Tunes' return to Cartoon Network could not have come at a better time. The state of the network in the late aughts was dire. Most of the network's original shows that the channel had built its brand on now felt sidelined in favor of filling up this schedule with imported Canadian shows and live-action programming as part of the channel's failed bid to compete with Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. The Looney Tunes returning felt like a harbinger for better things on the horizon, and that's really what it was. In the 2009 Cartoon Network upfront, Warner Bros. Announced that a new Looney Tunes show was in production. Titled Looney Tunes Laugh Riot, it was imagined as a true-to-the-classic show emulating the original run of the Looney Tunes shorts, and it would have veteran cartoonists like Bob Camp, Chris Riccardi, and Eddie Fitzgerald on the staff. It was also announced that a new slate of theatrical Roadrunner shorts were also in production. Unlike Laugh Riot, these would be done using state-of-the-art computer animation. At the dawn of the 2010s, the channel Cartoon Network underwent another rebrand on May 29, 2010. Titled the Check It Era, it aimed to evolve the brand by recentering its focus as a flag bearer for youth culture, premiering soon-to-be hits like Adventure Time and Regular Show that year. But missing from this rebrand were the Looney Tunes. While the Roadrunner shorts made their way into theaters, attached to some forgettable family fare like always, Looney Tunes Laugh Riot ended up getting delayed. While working on the 22-minute pilot episode called Casa del Calma, a Warner Bros. Higher-up took in a viewing of it. What they saw displeased them so much that most of the staff ended up getting laid off and the show was put on ice. Once again, Spike Brandt and Tony Cervone teamed up with veteran Cartoon Network producer Sam Register to salvage this project that looked to be headed for the wastebasket. And somewhere along the retooling process, somebody asked, what if we put them in a sitcom? Blessed with the imaginative title, the Looney Tunes show made its Cartoon Network premiere on May 3rd, 2011, alongside another new Cartoon Network show, The Amazing World of Gumball. The premise revolves around suburban homeowner Bugs Bunny and his dirtbag roommate Daffy Duck as they deal with different and occasionally absurd going-ons in everyday life. These can range from Daffy attempting to find the culprit who stole his newspaper, Bugs having to deal with a sadistic customer service rep at his cable company, and the two housemates deciding to adopt the Tasmanian Devil as their new pet dog. The supporting cast consists of all the other Looney Tunes characters, which include, but are not limited to, Porky Pig, Lola Bunny, Speedy Gonzales, Yosemite Sam, Foghorn Leghorn, Gossamer, Pete Puma, Granny, Sylvester, and Tweety. The show's structure would be a half-hour episode that would only be broken up by original music video segments and an original CGI Roadrunner short. As you would imagine, reception to the show when it premiered was just as divisive as when Lunatics Unleashed was released. Some people hated it because they did not like the redesigns done by Jessica Barutsky, which were created for the Laugh Riot pilots. But more people criticized the premise, saying that the idea of Bugs and Daffy getting into more script-driven sitcom plots ran antithetical to their true strengths of visual slapstick. Even then, people did praise the animation and strong voice acting that sold a lot of the jokes.
You're a narcissist? You're a sociopath? You're probably a psychopath. You're paranoid, sexist, and you make fun of the elderly. Those are just quirks!
And as time has gone by, more people, especially the ones who grew up with it, have come to appreciate the Looney Tunes show. While the setups for the plots initially came off as stock, the writers and animators could use them as springboards for getting the tunes into strange new areas. Like how a plot about Bugs lying to Porky to get out of a social engagement snowballs into him being imprisoned in a foreign country and having to be rescued by Daffy, who, as a result of Bugs' lie, joined the United States Marine Corps.
No, you're wrong!
The surrealism also extended to the music video segments. The songs could either range from Elmer Fudd's seductive R&B jam ode to grilled cheese, or a power metal anthem about Daffy Duck imagining himself as a powerful wizard. But if there was one thing people praised this show for the most, was for its recharacterization of Lola Bunny, turning her from a 90s idea of girl power into Bugs' on-again, off-again girlfriend who is ditzy to the point of insanity.
Not every girl is as stable as me.
This personality is sold by a wonderful performance from comedian Kristen Wiig, who delivers Lola's jaw-droppingly airheaded lines with such straight-faced, happy conviction.
Her name's Tina? That's not even a real name. That's a made-up name, like Balswick or Cathrarg. Good evening. My name's Cathrarg. I'll be your server.
It's hard to gauge whether the Looney Tunes show was a hit, but the early 10s was an excellent era for Cartoon Network where the channel and their shows dominated cable ratings. It could easily have been part of the high tide that was raising all the ships. And considering how many clips get shared around on social media and memeified by the former kids who grew up with the show, I would say that it was a success. Plus, it does deserve credit for finally breaking Bugs and Daffy out of their stagnating Chuck Jones rabbit season duck season dynamic and giving them fresh characterization. Bugs becoming more of a put-upon straight man, while Daffy felt more in line of the dumb, antisocial nuisance he was in the Frank Tashlin shorts.
Oh, hello, Officer Jerkface. I didn't recognize you away from the donut shop. I guess you can't catch real criminals, so instead you just harass innocent citizens. What a waste of my tax dollars.
While the Looney Tunes show only received 2 26-episode seasons, it was enough to keep around in reruns when the final episode aired on November 2nd, 2013, and netted a direct-to-video movie, Rabbit's Run, released on July 7th, 2015. Despite a divisive launch, the Looney Tunes show showed a path forward for the brand, one that could allow for experimentation while simultaneously taking it back to some forgotten roots. That path would end up leading to a dead end. Once production on the Looney Tunes show wrapped, concepts for a new Looney Tunes cartoon series were already being pitched around. Sam Register, now newly promoted to the position of president of Warner Bros. Animation and Digital Series Department, had one idea he wanted to try in particular: a reboot. Reboots and revivals as concepts were not new, but the idea behind them was gaining steam as channels were beginning to see newfound success in bringing old properties into the modern era. In fact, Register's Looney Tunes reboot was already planned alongside his reboots for Tom and Jerry and Scooby-Doo. One proposal was cooked up by animator Eric Kuska, a PG-13 short meant to reintroduce Bugs Bunny to modern audiences. In it, Bugs would face off against the Grim Reaper, outwitting him at every turn in classic style.
Alrighty, just roll up the windows. We're good to go. Right this way. And the air freshener.
But eventually, the Reaper gets the best of him, and Bugs is sentenced to hell for his reprehensible bad behavior from classic shorts, and shockingly, this includes the blackface. While Register and the rest of Warner passed on the idea, they liked it enough to repurpose the shorts animatic into a TV show pitch. That's where the reboot was born, and Kuska was put in charge as showrunner. It was decided early on that it would be less of an ensemble piece like past works and instead focus more on the face of the franchise, Bugs Bunny. This is reflected in the title of the project, Wabbit.
Going down a rabbit hole, where we go where no one knows.
see where the tunnel ends.
The goal was similar to the one stated by Laugh Riot: take Bugs Bunny back to his roots as an animated star of slapstick comedy shorts. But Register was adamant that the show avoided stale cliches, no more anvils falling on heads and the like. They were going to stay true to the spirit of the original Termite Terrace while updating the tunes to fit a more modern era. This is why, despite having a back-to-basics approach, Wabbit took some whiskey quid of weeps. The character designs for most of the Looney Tunes were radical departures from what had been done for decades, and, probably the most divisive, was the expansion of the principal cast, giving Bugs a sidekick in the Squirrel Squeaks, as well as making numerous additions to his various rogues gallery. Kuska said the focus on new enemies helped play into Bugs' strength as a character, as well as giving him more modern villains like reality TV personalities, phony fitness gurus, French spies, single female cougars, and sword and sorcery style barbarians. Oh wait, what? Wabbit made its television premiere on September 21st, 2015 on Cartoon Network and premiered on Boomerang just 2 weeks later. Despite netting some pretty high ratings from the jump, thanks to it getting a killer 5 PM Eastern time slot, reception was mixed. While the back-to-basics conceit was seen as admirable, the design and animation work left a lot to be desired. The flat boarding and reliance on tweening showed that Wabbit clearly did not receive the same budget as the Looney Tunes show. People also did not jive with the new characters, seeing the expanded cast as mostly failed new spins on old ideas. So when production on the second season came around, it was decided that the Wabbit reboot would be retooled. Instead of being focused on Bugs, it would now expand the focus to include the rest of the Looney Tunes ensemble, as well as some of the new characters introduced in the first season. To reflect this change, the show was renamed New Looney Tunes. It still stuck to the mission of making classic Looney Tunes with a modern twist. This season did succeed in that regard, making changes like reimagining Pepe Le Pew into a James Bond parody, and, for the first time in ages, giving Daffy his old screwball personality back. They even paired up characters that were never paired up in the classic shorts, showing a desire to break trends. It still carried over a lot of the issues people had with Wabbit though. Plus, the presence of the ensemble cast revealed a hidden weakness of the show. Trying to return it to form caused New Looney Tunes to lack any distinct identity. It never could stand on its own because people were always going to compare it to the original shorts. It only got worse when the third season was produced and showed that it was barely any different from the lion's share of post-Termite Terrace outputs, mostly playing the hits while being supported by celebrity cameos and references to the franchise's long history.
Boy, it looks like I'm in a real jam. A space jam.
But none of that really mattered because the Looney Tunes time on Cartoon Network was brief. After only airing 12 episodes, Wabbit got shuffled around on the schedule before being relegated to Boomerang in the spring of 2016. The retooled second season didn't even get to air on Cartoon Network until the fall of 2019. By then, production on the show had wrapped. The only reason New Looney Tunes got any new seasons was because it was a popular program on Boomerang's overseas affiliates. But here in its home country, it stayed locked up on premium cable. This was the period when Cartoon Network was flooding the network with reruns of their highest rated show, Teen Titans Go, so they were willing to trim the fat anyplace in the name of schedule optimization. But that was only a symptom of a larger problem Time Warner was now facing. Linear cable TV as a whole was beginning to die out. Cord cutting had become the latest consumer trend in the 2010s. As millennials entered a fraught post-recession job market, cable was one of the first luxuries they would relinquish. Technological advancements made streaming high-definition video over the internet more optimal than it had ever been before, easier for people to opt in to more affordable options like YouTube, Netflix, and Crunchyroll. This sent cable networks into somewhat of a death spiral. In order to keep their slowly decreasing ratings above water, they would program marathons devoted to reruns of their highest rated shows. But that would see the effect of turning off people who didn't want to see that show all the time, which in turn caused cable networks to program more marathons in order to hide the decline. It was a catch-22. Luckily, Time Warner did seem to be more prepared for this than they were for the internet in the 90s. In 2009, they spun off Time Warner Cable and AOL into their own separate companies as part of a post-recession restructuring. and they devoted most of the 2010s buying up popular websites like Rotten Tomatoes and Bleacher Report. It was the age of social media, and online media websites were what fueled them. These assets helped make Time Warner valuable again. Valuable enough that they had to fight off another attempt by Rupert Murdoch to buy the company for $80 billion in June of 2014. But that didn't mean Time Warner was looking to be acquired. They just needed to find the right buyer.
We're following a major developing story in the communications industry. AT&T has reportedly reached a deal to buy Time Warner for more than $80 billion.
On October 21st, 2016, a stunning announcement was made. Multinational telecommunication company AT&T announced that they were in negotiations with Time Warner to acquire their company and merge with them. The reasons for this merger, like with the AOL merger more than 15 years ago, ultimately came down to both companies wanting to compete with the larger tech companies. Google, Amazon, and rising star Netflix were corporate giants that had only grown bigger as more of the entertainment and business world moved online. The keys to the kingdom, once held by media conglomerates of old, were now being held by Silicon Valley by way of them delivering TV, movies, music, and other audiovisual content to the masses through television, smartphone, and tablets. The goal of the merger was to become just as big as those companies were. Time Warner would provide the content, while AT&T would provide the infrastructure. The merger was approved by Time Warner shareholders on February 15, 2017. After a failed antitrust suit spearheaded by the incoming first Trump administration for predictably petty reasons, the merger was closed on June 14, 2018. The next day, AT&T renamed the company Warner Media. Already, the business world was filled with skepticism. The announcements failed to budge any of their rival stocks. Plus, the memory of the bungled AOL merger remained fresh in the collective minds of the business world. But the infrastructure AT&T gave Warner Media meant that now they could make another big announcement. Warner Media announced that it would launch an over-the-top streaming service built on movies and television properties that they owned. No longer content to farm said media out to existing streaming services like Netflix and Hulu, which were growing bigger and bigger by the day, they now wanted control over their own walled garden full of their own entertainment brands. Warner already had a streaming service in the form of HBO Go to use as a foundation. AT&T would take their own existing streaming infrastructure, formed under the company Otter Media, and tie in cable operators to grandfather existing HBO subscribers into the new service when it launched on May 27, 2020. Said service would now be called HBO Max.
We must be over the rainbow.
For the business world, now was the right time to launch an over-the-top streaming network. Other companies like Disney, NBC Universal, Paramount, and Apple were already planning on their own foray into streaming, and Warner was determined to stake their claim early. Begun, the streaming wars had. One thing working in Warner Media's favor was the vast collection of classic film and TV brought on from decades of production and acquisitions. When it first launched in the spring of 2020 at $14.99 a month, the depth of its library compared to others made it the most bang for your buck. And with the emerging COVID-19 pandemic going on at the time causing people to stay at home, that only became a more appealing selling point. And of that depth of library included the Looney Tunes, the classic shorts, the Looney Tunes show, Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries, and Baby Looney Tunes. Two things made themselves clear. One, the shorts had once again been remastered. Not just remastered, but rescanned in a way that showed proper care. Over the course of the 2010s, Warner Brothers had gotten sloppy with how they handled the digital remastering of the classic Looney Tunes shorts, as seen in 2017's infamous Porky 101 DVD sets. But with the HBO Max remasterings, it showed that they were once again putting their best foot forward with showing these classics to a brand new audience. But more importantly, premiering alongside the launch of the new streaming network was a new Looney Tunes series of shorts with the simple title of Looney Tunes Cartoons. The concept began in 2017 when creator of the Cartoon Network show, Uncle Grandpa, Peter Braungart, took a lunch meeting with Warner Brothers creative executive Audrey Deal. After Deal unsuccessfully pitched him a project he was not interested in, Braungart replied that what he really wanted to do was direct a classic Looney Tunes short. Deal responded by booking him another meeting with Sam Register, who asked him if he wanted to direct not just one classic Looney Tunes short, but several. Apparently, Register wanted to go back to the idea of a Looney Tunes revival, only this time with the idea that these would be more deliberate throwbacks to the 1940s era, with much more fluid animation and designs, and focus on more similar oddball humor pioneered by the likes of Avery and Clampett. With Braungart in the showrunner's chair and Super Jail animator Joey Capps as animation director, Looney Tunes Cartoon achieved this goal.
Just a dumb baby seal.
Looney Tunes cartoons weren't simply the Looney Tunes given an update and a new coat of paint like the last couple of series. These were shorts made by people who had grown up watching the classic shorts on TV in the 80s and 90s and had that influence on their work. Creators like David Gemmell, Ryan Cottam, Johnny Ryan, Michael Rocco, Carolyn Director, Andrew Dickman, Andy Gonsalves, Gabe DeVaille, Guillaume Blackburn, James Ramos, Alain Seguin, and Phil Lockerbie, among others. From the outset, Braungart wanted this series of Looney Tunes shorts to be cartoonist-driven. He wanted not just the spirit of the Looney Tunes revitalized, but also the spirit of Termite Terrace itself, an environment where the artist always knows what's best. He and his team of cartoonists succeeded in that regard. When you look at these shorts, you see unbridled passion for the characters leap off the screen, capturing the innate zany anarchy of the vast Looney Tunes cast. And creatives were always willing to break new ground with the characters to make them shine all the brighter. So even when it came to playing the hits, the way they were executed somehow felt fresh again. They also pushed the envelope with the characters in ways that had not been done since the theatrical days or ever, which could lead to some blurring of the lines between funny and disturbing.
Wow, Doc, you're a miracle worker.
A sneak preview of the series, the minute-and-a-half short Dynamite Dance, premiered on YouTube on June 12, 2019. It showcased Bugs and Elmer in the new style that was reminiscent of the old style and built up some much-needed hype. When the show premiered on May 27th the next year, reception was almost universally positive. Critics and viewers called it a much-needed return to form by pointing out how everything from the designs to the animation to even Carl Johnson and Joshua Moishier's background music made this feel like the classic shorts. The series did, however, run into some limitations, mostly due to standards and practices changing with the times. For the first season, Elmer was not allowed to use any firearms in his pursuit of the Wascally Wabbits. However, this restriction would later be lifted with later seasons. And for as much as they tried to bring back every character in the Looney Tunes library, there was one glaring omission. The character of Pepe Le Pew had found himself under the microscope in the past couple of years thanks to his central gag. With the rise of the Me Too movement exposing how much sexual misconduct was woven into the fabric of the entertainment industry, suddenly having a character around like that became untenable. It did not help that there was a Pepe Le Pew movie script idea being spearheaded by a famous Hollywood failson who also turned out to be a creep. So, the skunk, tragically or not depending on who you are, was bastilled away from any new Looney Tunes projects indefinitely.
No, no! Please, mon chéri! Do not erase me! The void, she is cold and dark and...
But apart from all that, it had genuinely felt like Warner Brothers was recognizing the Looney Tunes were this important part of their brand again. They were all over HBO Max. Boomerang aired a marathon of Looney Tunes shorts and series on July 27, 2020, celebrating Bugs Bunny's 80th birthday. They even got the classic Looney Tunes shorts airing on over-the-air channel MeTV with a children's show style wraparound for that extra nostalgic appeal. The Looney Tunes were once again back on top. Or were they? It turns out that all of this had an ulterior motive. Remember how I said Warner Brothers wanted a Space Jam sequel? That desire never went away. On February 22, 2014, Warner Brothers made the announcement that they were developing a Space Jam sequel and were hoping to attach LeBron James, this era's Michael Jordan, to the project. James said of the project, "I've always loved Space Jam. It was one of my favorite movies growing up. If I have the opportunity, it will be great." People didn't think much of this news at first. Space Jam sequel announcements had been swirling for years and never panned out. What made people think this would be any different? Well, when James and his film studio, Spring Hill Entertainment, inked a film and television deal with Warner Brothers, it told a different story. The Hollywood landscape was different in 2015. General audiences no longer cared about movie stars. What they really wanted was their favorite intellectual properties getting revived, rebooted, or remade. You didn't even need to make the movies good or interesting in any way. The strength of the IP will carry it to incredible box office profits. The success of both Jurassic World and Star Wars The Force Awakens proved that this was the new road to success. And since there was a palatable nostalgia for Space Jam courtesy of then 20-something millennials having the run of the internet, a legacy sequel for the 1996 film was a no-brainer. Getting a Space Jam sequel made still proved to be difficult. Fast and Furious director Justin Lin was initially brought on, but was ultimately replaced by indie director Terrence Nance. Noted film director Ryan Coogler was brought on as a producer, but even then, pre-production was slow. By the time shooting began, the script had undergone several rewrites. 6 writers were credited, but Coogler and co-producer Sev Ohanian had also gotten their uncredited hands on it. Troubles did not end come principal photography. Nance ended up leaving the project a month in due to Warner Media dictating how he had to direct the film to their specifications with little in the way of creative freedom. He would be replaced by Undercover Brother director Malcolm D. Brown. After that, shooting went more smoothly. No doubt helped by LeBron's abandonment, move from the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Los Angeles Lakers. All that was left was post-production, where most movies are made nowadays. Warner Brothers amassed a dream team of animators which included Mark Henn, Tony Bancroft, Ole Loken, and returning industry vet Dan Haskett. The production was notable as the animation process used a combination of traditional and digital techniques pioneered through Toon Boom Animation's Harmony software. The animation focus of this part of the process also meant production was not affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The film was officially announced in May of 2020. Because of the pandemic, it was pushed back to Warner's 2021 slate in order for its release to line up with the reopening of movie theaters. But the marketing blitz began much earlier. Warner Brothers pulled out all the stops, partnering with companies like Kraft Heinz, General Mills, Hallmark, GameStop, Mattel, Nike, Converse, and Funko. The Space Jam sequel was obviously following in the capitalist legacy of its forebear, so naturally its official title was Space Jam: A New Legacy. On July 12, 2021, Space Jam: A New Legacy had its premiere in Los Angeles, with the film releasing into theaters 4 days later. And it was not good.
Oh boy.
Space Jam: A New Legacy told the story of LeBron James needing to rescue his wayward son from the clutches of rogue AI Algorithm, played by Don Cheadle, who has taken over the digital world known as the Warner Brothers Serververse, the home of all Warner Brothers intellectual properties. And it is here where LeBron and the Looney Tunes must battle with Algorithm and his goon squad to save LeBron's family and the entire Serververse, all among an audience of your favorite Warner Brothers characters, which include the Flintstones, The Mask, the Joker, King Kong, the Iron Giant, the Droogs from A Clockwork Orange, and Sister John from Ken Russell's The Devils, a movie Warner Brothers owns and still refuses to release a full director's cut of due to its controversial subject matter. A New Legacy is a crass movie and only highlights where the Looney Tunes were compared to where they were when the first Space Jam movie came out. In the first movie, they were stars on the same level as Michael Jordan, but in its sequel, they are merely LeBron James's sidekicks, mere cogs in the capitalist machine to highlight how many recognizable brands Warner has in its portfolio and how you can now watch them if you subscribe to their streaming service.
We're done running tests on your Badger thing. It turns out his condition is irreversible. I'll never erase what I saw from my brain. He's your problem now, dum-dum!
They're only here because they were in the first film, and that gives legitimacy to them acting as hype man for both LeBron and the vast Warner Brothers media empire.
Winter, I say, winter is coming!
And even with the talent behind the animation, the Toons spend most of the movie being forced to act in heavily market-tested and executive-friendly ways. It's why they spend most of the screen time as 3D animated homunculi courtesy of Industrial Light and Magic. It's why Porky Pig's big moment is doing a rap battle. It's why the final act of the film revolves around Bugs Bunny sacrificing himself for LeBron's sake as a means to artificially wring out undeserved pathos. It's the modern C-suite's idea of how to make the Looney Tunes a box office franchise.
I look expensive!
The film opened at number 1 with a $31.65 million domestic opening, but the second week saw a massive 69% decline to $9.5 million earned. One of the many victims of Warner Media's boneheaded move to release their blockbuster slate on HBO Max the same day they were released in theaters. A move that cost them so much money and burned many bridges in the process. Overall, A New Legacy barely made back its budget. Critically, it was rightfully panned, with critics saying that the flashy CGI did little to disguise a by-the-numbers script and that the overt promotion of Warner Bros. Other brands took precedent over everything else.
What in the Matrix hell?
Space Jam: A New Legacy was a disaster that would cap off an even bigger disaster. By this point, the business world had considered the AT&T Time Warner merger to be another failure. Not to the same level as the AOL merger, but it was a failure all the same. First, there was the investor belief that AT&T had overpaid for Time Warner. While the company was highly valued, the $85 billion price tag AT&T gave it only ensured that the newly merged company would be saddled with heavy debts. In the years since, there have been allegations that AT&T engaged in questionable accounting tactics to inflate the projections on which the value of the Warner assets was based on. But what ultimately doomed the merger was the same thing that doomed the AOL merger: culture clash. AT&T's corporate culture was one of kingdom building where departments were encouraged to compete against each other. That culture was not keen on integrating within Time Warner's more steady, bureaucratic company culture. Through restructuring and numerous layoffs, AT&T replaced most of Time Warner's upper ranks with their own guys. Most, if not all of them, had no idea how to work in the entertainment business, nor did they care to learn either. This destroyed a company culture based around nurturing success and creativity and replaced it with one devoted to instant results. It's what led to the cancellation of multiple Time Warner projects that had been in the works for years. Critically lauded shows from HBO to Cartoon Network were canceled without warning. Projects that were greenlit by former Warner executives were now voided by the new AT&T executives. It's a miracle that projects like Looney Tunes cartoons even got made during this period of broken glass and hurt feelings. One could assume that they were salvaged not because they were far along in production, but because at least one AT&T executive saw the value in the property. But it was a value that could only serve an increasingly narrow vision. It's why one of the few Looney Tunes projects that got greenlit during the AT&T era was the preschool program Bugs Bunny Builders, as part of an abortive attempt to rebrand Cartoon Network into a preschool network. By mid-2021, the AT&T side of Warner Media got sick of dealing with the Warner side and made the surprise announcement that they were spinning off control of Warner to rival company Discovery Inc. After only 3 years, AT&T recognized that their merger with Time Warner was a mistake. But don't worry, the AT&T executives were punished for their failure by receiving massive cash payouts. Meanwhile, the over 50,000 employees who lost their jobs through the merger restructuring were never compensated. The Warner Media Discovery merger would close on April 8, 2022. Warner Media was soon rechristened as Warner Bros. Discovery. AT&T had made out like bandits from the entertainment industry. Now the control of Warner Bros. And its assets rested in the hands of one man, David Zaslav. While initially beginning his career as a lawyer, Zaslav was a lifer of the television industry. He had gotten his start at NBC, where he shepherded the launch of their news channels CNBC and MSNBC. Through the 90s, he had forged numerous media partnerships as president of NBC's cable division. This is what led him to become CEO of Discovery Communications, the company behind the popular edutainment channels Discovery Channel, TLC, and Animal Planet. Under his tenure, Zaslav took what he thought to be a niche product and turned it into a massive Fortune 500 company, creating new channels like The Hub, Investigation Discovery, and Oprah Winfrey Network, and acquiring established ones like the Food Network and HGTV. From a business perspective, Zaslav seemed like the right man to fix the AT&T mess. He was a veteran of the media business who understood its ins and outs and could take successful ventures and make them even greater. Others were worried. While Zaslav did make Discovery into a powerhouse, it came at the expense of the original company's shared values. It was under Zaslav's tenure that Discovery and its sister channels shifted away from educational documentary focus to make more salacious and personality-driven reality TV fare, programs that encouraged the worst behavior in people and promoted conspiracy theories and junk science to the masses, all for the sake of better ratings. Zaslav's history with Discovery and its many networks showed that he was an avaricious mercenary capitalist only concerned with making as much money as possible. Those fears were well founded, as when Zaslav arrived on May 2022, one of the first things he did was announce a rebranding of HBO Max to simply Max. The official story is that it was to better integrate the content of Discovery's streaming network Discovery Plus into HBO Max's in their inevitable merging, but the more cynical viewed it as Zaslav seeing the prestigious HBO brand as a liability that could possibly alienate the average consumer of such quality products like 90 Day Fiancé. Zaslav immediately revealed himself as someone who was only concerned about the bottom line. This could be a justifiable position to take, as the failed AT&T merger had left the company with $43 billion in debt, but Zaslav was not interested in picking up the pieces of Warner Brothers that AT&T had left behind, but rather assembling them in his own image. This was made evident when, upon learning that the previous higher-ups had greenlit the film Cry Macho to make good on an existing deal they had with director Clint Eastwood, Zaslav made this proclamation from behind Jack Warner's old desk. "We don't owe anyone any favors. It's not show friends, it's show business. The spirit of the asshole lives on." David Zaslav is a man who knows the cost of everything but the value of nothing. He's an indifferent, impatient suit who only thinks in spreadsheets, shareholder value, and bonuses that he can give himself. It's the mindset that informs so many of his alienating business decisions, from his handling of Turner Classic Movies to the shuttering of Cartoon Network's long-standing animation studio. But it's his handling of one such franchise that sums up his tenure. At the start of the AT&T era, Warner Bros. Pictures announced the development of a Wile E. Coyote project titled Coyote vs. Acme. It was to be an animated live-action hybrid where Wile E. Coyote, fed up after every Acme product made by the Acme Corporation backfired on him in his pursuit of the Roadrunner, leverages a massive lawsuit against them in a parody of courtroom films. The film would star Will Forte, John Cena, and Wile E. Coyote, among other Looney Tunes. After spending 4 years in on-again, off-again development, principal photography took place from March to May 2022 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After that, post-production with 3D and 2D animation of the Looney Tunes cast was animated by Warner Animation Group. By all accounts, production went smoothly, and it was geared up for its planned theatrical release on July 21st, 2023. But then, trouble began. Shortly after Zaslav arrived, Coyote vs. Acme was removed from Warner's film release schedule and had its slot replaced with Greta Gerwig's Barbie. And while the decision proved to be financially lucrative thanks to the mimetic power of Barbenheimer that summer, Coyote vs. Acme did not appear to get another release date. On November 9th, Warner Bros. Finally brought to light the reason why Coyote vs. Acme was not getting another release, and probably never would. The film was finished, but Zaslav had ordered the film to be shelved indefinitely to ensure the company netted a $30 million tax write-down on this $70 million production. A write-down is a technique accountants use to reduce the value of an asset to offset a loss or an expense. In other words, despite the completed film testing well to audiences, Zaslav, and by extension the rest of Warner Discovery, had no faith in this film. But it gets uglier. Just 4 days after that news dropped, Warner Bros. Announced that it would be shopping around Coyote vs. Acme to other distributors. Thanks to high praise from multiple industry insiders who had seen the film, plenty of Warner's competitors made offers for the film, all of which Zaslav and Warner Bros. Turned down. They rejected bids from Netflix, Amazon, and Paramount Pictures on the basis they couldn't meet the $80 million price tag to sell the film. They also rejected any and all counteroffers. Even with plenty of industry buzz behind it, Coyote vs. Acme was destined to forever languish in the studio vault, all because Zaslav saw a potential tax break as far more valuable than a Looney Tunes picture. Whether Coyote vs. Acme is good or bad was irrelevant at this point. It showed that Zaslav's Warner Bros. Had not only lost faith in that movie, but also the entire Looney Tunes brand. Coyote vs. Acme was only the most publicized victim of Zaslav's purge. Another Looney Tunes film, Bye Bye Bunny, was set to be the first animated musical starring all the Looney Tunes. But despite surviving having its entire production team laid off in a round of Warner Discovery restructuring on September 6, 2022, it was all confirmed to be shelved indefinitely on August 2024. But the most devastating blow came this year. Zaslav opted to not renew licensing deals with old Warner Brothers shows that stream on Max. This has been a trend going back to 2023 when people noticed that the shorts and the shows were getting removed from the streaming network despite Warner Discovery owning them. This all came to a head on March 16, 2025 when the entire slate of classic Looney Tunes shorts was removed from Max. Included in the purge was also numerous Looney Tunes spin-offs, the Spielberg-produced cartoons from the 90s, and the vast majority of Cartoon Network's programming history. What remained after the dust cleared was the 2019 series and the preschool-aimed spin-offs. At the time of this video, HBO Max's cartoon output, like its network output, is only really supported by Adult Swim. You can still watch most of these shows, provided you don't live in the United States. This seals the deal that Zaslav does not give a damn about legacy or nurturing art. He wants results, and only results that justify him cutting costs to line his own pocketbook. Is why his vision for Warner Discovery, which is about to split into two separate companies, is all about the biggest, most lucrative IP. He is putting all his eggs into projects like big expensive DC superhero films, turning the Lord of the Rings franchise into its own cinematic universe, and remaking the Harry Potter film series because J.K. Rowling doesn't like the fact that the old child actors find her transphobia repulsive. The Looney Tunes do not figure into this new vision for Warner Brothers whatsoever. And with Warner Brothers Animation's future being mostly dictated by Dr. Seuss films that rip off the Illumination formula, they may never will. Because this is not the Hollywood that created the Looney Tunes anymore. The Looney Tunes could thrive in the old glitzy Tinseltown image of Hollywood, and that was true even when television took over. Even when studios became conglomerates that became corporations, that magic was still there. Enough that there would always be a place for them in the entertainment industry. But now, the Hollywood of today is tech campuses, streaming algorithms, viral content, outsourcing, green screens, data centers, and generative machine learning. The practice of making art is slowly being strangled by venture capitalists wanting to streamline the process by any means necessary. They don't see movies, TVs, music, games, or animation anymore. They just see content. It's all the same to them. It's content they can greenlit with a stroke of a pen, have increasingly underpaid workers construct it to their exact specifications, and then trash it once it's released to middling reception and forgotten about. Even at their most merchandised phase of the 90s, the Looney Tunes still felt like stars. Now, they only exist as lines on an Excel spreadsheet, their future endeavors determined by what the arbitrary number next to them says. It's not just Coyote vs. Acme on that shelf, it's Bugs, Daffy, and the rest of the cast sitting alongside it. And unless some random metric on a quarterly report goes up, there they shall remain. It's Algae Rhythm's world, and we're just living in it. But hey, that's capitalism, baby.
Game blouses! What?
Wait, hold it! You didn't think I'd let it end that way, did you?
So is that all, folks? Is that all there is to the story? When I began this little mini-series, I never expected things to get as bad as they currently are. In a way, I'm glad I never ended up going through with my original plan of releasing episodes up until the end of 2020 and having that legacy end with the then future Space Jam sequel. Ending this series at this point is better this way.
Well, that happened.
But even with all that recent history, the mission statement of the series never changed. Sure, I wanted to talk about characters like Bugs, Daffy, Porky, Elmer, Yosemite Sam, Sylvester, Tweety, Foghorn Leghorn, Pepe Le Pew, Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote, Speedy Gonzales, and countless other tunes. Show off why they're such memorable characters, highlight their origins, their best shorts, even their lowest moments. But the true mission behind this little series was to shine a spotlight on the creators of these tunes. It goes without saying, but there would be no Looney Tunes without the directors, animators, writers, ink and paint girls, cameramen, voice actors, composers, sound engineers, and producers that made it all possible. The story didn't begin with businessmen, it began with a small group of artists tinkering with this brand new medium called animation. And now, that entire generation of creators have since passed from this world. The last decade saw the passing of Termite Terrace's final holdouts. Voice actor Stan Freberg on April 7, 2015 at age 88. Cameraman turned producer Hal Gear on January 26, 2017 at age 100. Voice actress June Foray on July 26, 2017 at age 99. Animator Bob Givens on December 14, 2017, also at age 99. Producer David H. Stapati on September 21st, 2021 at age 91, and the voice of Cool Cat himself, Larry Sorch, on July 8th, 2022, at the ripe old age of, you guessed it, 99. With his passing, the final living link to the Termite Terrace era was severed. What kind of legacy did the Looney Tunes and their creators leave behind? Well, whatever it is, it's a legacy that's disappearing. With the atomization of the monoculture, it's harder to keep media franchises like the Looney Tunes in the public consciousness than ever before. There simply are too many things competing for other people's attention. And even in this era where nostalgia reigns supreme and some IP is better than no IP, the Looney Tunes have not exactly benefited from this mass financialization and consolidation of the media landscape like they did in the 90s, because they've already had their turn. The Looney Tunes cartoons, while a successful revival of the classic styles, seems to have only really happened as part of a wider marketing strategy. It was greenlit to promote the launch of HBO Max, which became Max but is now HBO Max again, and to prime audiences for the Space Jam sequel. And all of that probably wouldn't have happened if the Looney Tunes' presence wasn't such a key part of the original.
Very funny. Let's all laugh at the duck.
But now that's over and done with. Production on both have wrapped, and their impact on the annual financial reports have long since been processed. Now the tunes can go back into the Warner vault for who knows how long until the higher-ups make a vague announcement about plans. It's the same reason why those reboots of Animaniacs and Tiny Toons exist. Not for any artistic merits, but to simply hook nostalgic millennials into buying a streaming package.
A creativity crisis fueled by terrified executives clinging to the past like rats to the debris of a sinking ship.
Yeah, have you no shame?
Here's your check for the Animaniacs reboot, you sellouts.
Even if there was demand, how much can we be sure it would be done in a way that does the characters justice? The Looney Tunes thrive when the animators are given freedom and trust to make their visions happen. But the animation industry isn't the same as it was when Looney Tunes cartoons came out, let alone the Termite Terrace era. As the existing media landscape gets consolidated into fewer and fewer companies, the streaming world is currently undergoing a mass streamlining process of prioritizing what kinds of shows and movies get made, along with the tightening of the collective belts. This has made cartoons, one of the few industries that suffered no setbacks during the COVID-19 pandemic, the first on the chopping block. Combined with the slow death of linear cable, this has ensured that the American animation industry barely has a career pipeline that ensures stable careers and creative freedom. Why do you think Japanese anime and indie cartoons on YouTube have flourished this decade? They've been the ones picking up the slack. But that's not sustainable. The indies can only do so much in ensuring long-term stability, and the anime industry is currently going through its own troubles at the moment. And, at the time of this writing, things keep getting bleaker.
Next in our spotlight, a major billion-dollar merger deal between Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery.
David Zaslav has laid bare that he only merged with Warner Brothers solely so he could sell it to someone richer. Now Warner Brothers is the property of Netflix, a company who seeks to monopolize the TV and film industry and overall make art worse, seeking to destroy the theatrical distribution model while making the home viewing experience shoddier and more expensive. All those factors have made it so that the legacy of the Looney Tunes and its creators is in danger of passing out of all cultural knowledge. There have been reports that kids have no idea who Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck or any of these characters are. The legacies of the Looney Tunes and their creators looks less secure than they have ever been, all because their legacies are in the hands of people who care more about shareholder value than preservation of culture. And that's true throughout all the entertainment industry. Even Disney no longer seems to care about its once precious heritage. It's a grim time. Is there any hope it can all be kept alive? Yes.
Well now, who do we have here? Porky Pig and Daffy Duck.
The day the Earth blew up is evidence that the Looney Tunes are still alive. Not just alive, but breaking new ground. A feature-length animated movie done in full 2D animation centered around the classic duo of Porky and Daffy having to save the world from an alien mind control plot. Not only is it a well-animated film that is dense with gags,
Sweeter than I expected.
Alright, he hasn't turned green yet, that's good.
Though I can't quite pinpoint the aftertaste.
but it is doing what has long been thought to have been impossible. Having characters like Porky and Daffy break out of the short subject mold and carry an entire film without needing to be part of an ensemble cast.
What? I said, no, here's the script, catch up on your own time. We've got bigger fish to fry.
Moreover, it goes beyond the rehashing of classic jokes from the Golden Age and invents a whole slew of them for the movie. It's taking the Looney Tunes franchise into new uncharted territories while staying true to the original shorts' spirit.
Well, technically, shatterproof glass can withstand 24,000 pounds per square inch without breaking.
Oh, thank goodness.
But that's not shatterproof glass.
We are so fortunate that a film like this exists. We are also fortunate that the people who made it exist. At this point, we know of the legacies that Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, Friz Freleng, Tex Avery, Robert McKimson, Mel Blanc, and everyone else left behind. If you ever see the characters they created in your vision, those legacies will never vanish. But what about the people who came after them? What about Hal Gear, who helped bring the Looney Tunes into the modern era with a newfound Warner Brothers animation? What about Greg Ford and Terry Lennon, who helped bring the Looney Tunes shorts back into theaters with proper budgets? What about the many voice actors who took on the unenviable task of replacing Mel Blanc after his passing? What about Tom Ruegger building an entire spin-off universe inspired by the classic shorts? What about Tony Cervone and Bruce W. Smith making the cast look equally as good as Michael Jordan? What about everyone that worked on the day the Earth blew up? Peter Braungart, Derek Bachman, David Gemmell, Michael Rocco, Andrew Dickman, Katie Rice, Johnny Ryan, Jason Riker, Alex Kerwin, Guillaume Blackburn, Joshua Moisure, voice actors Eric Bauza and Candy Milo, and the countless upon countless animators, editors, writers, and musicians who worked on this film. Will any person I mentioned above and throughout this video have the same legacy as the original creatives from the Termite Terrace era? Because they should.
Let's get Looney!
It's important to know who the Looney Tunes are and why they are such a huge part of animation and film history. It's also just as important to recognize who made that history and who continues to write that history. Warner Brothers and the other corporate overlords would prefer it if people didn't know how the sausage got made. They want to keep the creative process as anonymous as possible to keep creatives under their thumb. Overworked, underpaid, and above all else, replaceable. It's been like that for as long as the film business has been around. Credits were a thing people had to fight long and hard for. With the business and tech sectors forcing generative AI technology onto the world, you see what the powers that be wanted all along. A tool to separate labor from capital. They don't want you to think of Looney Tunes as the creation of animators, as such recognition could allow them to be paid more money. They want you to see the Looney Tunes as the creation of Warner Brothers the business, and only Warner Brothers the business. But they're not. A computer cannot make a Looney Tunes short. It takes skilled hands, humor, and vision to bring the Looney Tunes to life. In his farewell letter to Termite Terrace, Bob Clampett said that there is no better nor surer way of reaching all the old Warner cartoon gang than through the animator. And that will keep being the same law as long as people can still draw that wascally wabbit. Even if it looks doom and gloom now, the Looney Tunes and its creators have weathered similar storms and are still here today. We could be coming to the end of another one right now. We don't just have the day the Earth blew up. The classic shorts are now airing on the free streaming network Tubi to immense success. Best moment compilations are racking up millions of views on YouTube. The characters live on through memes, through TikTok fan cams, and through the scores upon scores upon scores of fan art and comics of them that gets drawn every day. Coyote vs. Acme is even going to be coming out next year. Not through Warner Brothers, but coming out regardless. But even if all of that was not happening right now, the Looney Tunes have forever made their mark on the art world. Even if they were to vanish tomorrow, they have made their mark on the global culture so thoroughly that the Looney Tunes could never, ever fully go away.
He's fucking dead.
The legacy of Looney Tunes is written all throughout film and cartoon history thanks to its innumerable creative voices from the past, present, and future. And as long as those voices keep working to inspire similar creative voices, that legacy will keep on being written with sticks of dynamite. Whatever's next for the Looney Tunes, we just gotta stay tuned. Because folks, it never will be all.
I go home, folks. At night, I'll snuggle in my burrow. A tree's my marquee. But bugs, the show must go on. Well, why can't it go on without me? Without me? Oh, why do I gotta be Bugs Bunny and never just a bunny? No one bugs. After 81 years, this rabbit's done. He's more than ready to unplug. If only it were so easy. If only I could be free. When can I stop being the bunny that bugs me and be the bunny that I wanna be?
But now it's all over. It doesn't matter anymore.